Okay, so there is a hell of a lot happening in sport in the last, well, day or so. Massive amounts of news in the football world involving the Newcastle United takeover. There's been an arbitrator involved in that, and they have stated in their report that the Premier League and other clubs abused their position to block the deal with the Saudi based takeover of Newcastle United. So that's an ongoing story. Derby won against Reading, so their first victory since their administration and points deduction. So Derby are fighting to obviously get out of the relegation zone in the Championship, and of course there's the ongoing issues with Derby's ownership and administration and possible liquidation. Barcelona have lost 3-0 against Benfica. Now, before everyone goes, Benfica are not a great side. They are a half decent side. They're not the side they were in years past, but this is Barcelona's worst start to the Champions League in the modern era. Real Madrid losing to Sheriff Tiraspol. So, two of the three remaining members of the European Super League have had rather heavy defeats. Also, in regards to the European Super League, is that UEFA are no longer going to be pursuing their legal case against the three remaining clubs, which also include Juventus. This is in regards to a Spanish court's decision, basically saying they don't have a legal case to continue to take to court, which is highly interesting. So yeah, the two Real Madrid and Barcelona are in serious trouble. The stats don't lie in their position. Barcelona, I think, are in a worse position than Real Madrid. Um, that Good morning. Yeah, so obviously Barcelona losing last night, Real Madrid losing on Tuesday night. UEFA no longer seeking legal action against the three remaining Super League sides. Those two heavy defeats, many fans of the sport, both here in Europe and overseas, are rubbing their hands with glee at the two heavy, embarrassing defeats for the two so-called Spanish giants. Obviously, also the Newcastle United situation is really interesting due to the collapse takeover and an arbitrator saying that the Premier League was using undue influence to block the takeover deal. There's still a possibility that the Saudi-led consortium, who have said that there's still a bit on the table, could actually take over Newcastle United. There has also been a report that cost them in excess of 10 million in losses. Of course, COVID will have some impact on that, which is interesting. Obviously, Derby County winning against Reading, that's their first victory since administration, although they're not out of the woods yet, even though obviously they get the win and they're still actually, if you look at the form book, if they didn't have the points deduction, they'll be in the top half of the table of the Championship. There's still that threat of liquidation, although they're 95% on the way to a solution. So, in that regard, the situation at Derby is a tense one. However, it's looking likely that there will be a solution found, but there's still the threat of liquidation and therefore expulsion from the Football League. The situation, though, in football is not a great one, um, all things considered. There is definitely massive concerns in regards to football finance in general. And if you look at the comments section on many forums and on many news sites where they allow obviously fans to post a comment, have your say on BBC Sport, for example, most people are overjoyed with what's happening with Barcelona and Real Madrid, and to a certain extent Juventus as well. Massive financial mismanagement at both clubs. Really poor transfer policy, question marks over where the money's gone and their spending habits. So, yeah, really interesting in that regard. And it, it sums up the situation that football itself, as a global sport, has found itself in, obviously, in recent years. Um, Much wider implications for the long term stability of the sport. There's no question on that. I mean, if we read through some of the headlines, I mean, crikey, it's dominated by issues off the field for a lot of clubs. So I'm going to go on the BBC Sport website because well, there's no one else in the live stream. Let's have a look. So these are the main headlines. So, oh well, yeah, but you know, the fact that the Premier League also technically broke competition rules and had undue influence, so breached their own rules and the FA's rules is interesting. So there could be um, legal cases there as well. So let's have a look. Also in the Rugby Championship, 6 Argentina players and 2 coaches have been expelled from the Rugby Championship over breaching quarantine rules in Australia. They're obviously all based in Queensland. They went to New South Wales, breached the rules that the Australian state and federal governments put in place. So that's key. 6 key players and 2 coaches have been sent home. Uh, yeah, so football. Let's have a look. Unvaccinated athletes also at the Winter Olympics will have to do a 21-day quarantine. So that's interesting. So that'll be interesting what the NHL with the ice hockey players, for example, do. Yeah, the Premier League abused its position in Newcastle takeover tribunal was heard. Uh, what else have we got? Hull KR won what came away from the Super League Grand Final, considering that this time last year they were bottom and were struggling. Let's have a look. There's all sorts going on. Let's have a look. Yeah. So yeah, in regards to the Newcastle situation, which I've been following since the beginning in 2017 when he initially put the club up for sale. This situation's been going on for about 4 or 5 years with Newcastle. Multiple takeover deals that have got close and collapsed for various reasons. The latest one involving Amanda Staveley, who was involved in the first major one. It is interesting. The fact that the Premier League have been found to have used undue influence and gone against competition rules with Premier League clubs as well and broadcasters isn't a good sign for the future of the sport and the transparency of the process. Now, I'm sure that Newcastle fans, not all of them are on board with this takeover idea with the Saudi money. I'm not saying that all Newcastle fans are in unison in that. Mike Ashley wants to sell. The fan base just want him out at any cost, really. But it does slap of double standards when there is Arab money from other states involved in the game, be it here domestically and overseas. There is some politics involved in regards to Qatar and Saudi Arabia. They're not getting on particularly politically in the region, and there's various issues with that. But they allowed the Abu Dhabi, basically the UAE, to buy Man City. Obviously, in Europe, they allow PSG people by the Qatari government. So there is clearly a conflict of interest there. The fact that basically national governments are using public limited companies to buy football clubs, especially when those national governments do have a tricky track record when it comes to human rights, of which we can all agree. I'm not saying this deal is perfect, not at all. So yeah, obviously, there's no one saying this deal's perfect. But it does smack of double standards by the Premier League and the other Premier League clubs in regards to this deal. There's Chinese money, there's Arabian money from other nations involved in football, there's American money, there are some state sponsored owners, basically. And I watched a documentary, an Australian, Four Corners, which is their version of Panorama, which was actually focusing on um, primarily actually on the City Football Group and a whole host of other um, owners of clubs in Australia and further afield, and where the money comes from and the transparency in the process. So there are some concerns that over club ownership, there's links to organised crime in there, money laundering, human rights abuses, the whole lot. And obviously, us in Europe, we're pretty used to dodgy club ownership in a variety of leagues, be it national owners, like local owners who are dodgy, like Berry situation, Mel Morris at Derby, to overseas owners who have some suspicious finances. Chileno at Leeds, for example, he was convicted of fraud. So the whole process of club ownership and the fit and proper persons test and everything like that is clearly not working. There's much wider implications in regards to club ownership, where the money comes from, who sits on boards, who invests, transparency of the process. The fact that the Premier League did actually use undue influence to block the move is not good. They had no actual reason to do so, considering that another member of the Premier League is owned by a state actor in Man City from the same region. And question marks have been raised over that acquisition. Now, for all the Arabian nations, they obviously want to diversify their economies away from oil and gas in the next 10 to 50 years. They want to modernise their economies. We all know that. And the documentary I watched did obviously state that, obviously, politically and economically, that was the process that the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these countries want to do. They want to modernise their economies. They want to open up their economies to other investment other than oil and gas and mineral extraction, diversify tourism as well, the new public image. But the human rights side of things is still obviously a major concern. Amnesty International have raised multiple concerns in recent years in regards to Chinese and Arab investment, not only in football but in other sports as well. We've seen a lot of criticism aimed at boxing and MMA, going over and having major events in the Arabian Peninsula. We've seen, obviously, a lot of backlash against that. So these issues much wider in scope. However, this arbitrator has basically said that the Premier League and a Qatari media network, beIN Sports, which has its own issue with the Saudi government over pirated broadcasts, not in Europe but actually in Asia. It got political. Shouldn't have been the case. Obviously, when you have state-backed public companies or nationalised companies, basically being the way to channel funds into operating these football clubs and other sporting entities, there is obviously that concern of due diligence, impartiality. At the same time, obviously, sport does need investment, especially professional sport needs investment. But there are rules governing against government interference and government investment in professional entities. If it was, let's say, grassroots investment, that's a different kettle of fish. Obviously, we try and keep politics and sport separate. But while I'm not a massive fan of the Arab money in football, as we've seen with the Qatar World Cup, which should never have been awarded, there is a lot of corruption there. There's bribery there. But of course, we're not naive to think it doesn't happen domestically with domestic and European owners. We know it does. This is where FIFA themselves, some of the blame has to lie with not just football, but I think all sports need to be very, very, very careful. But we have the Dubai Sevens as part of the Rugby Sevens program. And the Sevens go all over the world. Hong Kong, I'm just going to shut up. It's freezing here. I haven't turned the heating on. Oh, it's got very cold the last few days. Very, very cold. But no, it is interesting that they get on one political. There's some insidious political involvement from a left wing um, organisation, which has hijacked a social movement. And I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of that movement. It has created a lot of division, which I think is definitely creating a lot of social division there within the sport, well, within sport in general. We already have uh, charitable organisations in place to increase inclusivity and such. Clearly, there's another report over like transgender athletes and sports not being compatible with them, and I think for a very, very, very small minority to create it becomes more divisive than unifying. And I think sport should be a unifier. In regards to the Newcastle United takeover, if it had been another, there's been multiple bids that have collapsed for various reasons, and obviously Mike Ashley wants to sell. Um, Regardless of what people think of Mike Ashley's ownership, and of course, it's not been a great period for Newcastle United on and off the field. Regardless of the French tax fraud investigation, which has been ongoing, it's recently been concluded on the Newcastle United end of things. There was police involvement. Obviously, that's been on the backdrop of the attempted sale. Um, you know, it's a there's a lack of transparency. It's a very very complex, confusing process, and your average sports fan, when it comes to team ownership, all they really care about is their team being invested in, the facilities being, of a decent standard, the infrastructure being there, and of course the players playing as well as they can. Now, Steve Bruce is unfortunately he's basically facing firing squad every week from the Newcastle fan base. He wasn't the first choice manager to get the job after Benitez left. They went through a lot of managers who managed the club before and other available managers, and they ended up with Steve Bruce. So you can criticise or praise Brucey as much as you want on him as a manager. He's in a very difficult position. Whoever took the job was in a difficult position. I think Mike Ashley's done a pretty bit of sly manoeuvring there to get him in place because it can deflect some of the pressure off his ownership on Steve Bruce, who unfortunately I think he's been thrown under the bus, regardless of what you think of his quality of management, his style of play, his tactics, his selections. Past managers said, look, it is badly run behind the scenes. On the ownership side of things, the youth infrastructure and the training infrastructure isn't great. Oh, look, yeah, I mean, look, if football had any principles, I'm not. Let's not overly. Just some fans are like, we need investment in our clubs. We'll take whatever owner we've got as long as they promise investment and the club are successful. If in regards to football governorship, and I will say since 1992 and the influx of the TV money, the overinflation of wages, transfer fees, and all that, too much money's in the game. You can have too much of a good thing. Um, there's definitely a a lack of transparency within the system. There is definitely poor governance oversight. If you know, we know that now some leagues are imposing some sort of salary or spending caps, but it's not as if like Spain have decided to bring in some kind of cap constraints. Players have obviously, I don't think all players are as ignorant as portrayed in the media that they're all thick. Far from it. Player agents have too much power in regards to contract negotiations, where players end up. Um, it puts a lot of pressure. I mean, it's not just football that's in the situation. There's concerns that rugby union are going down the same route in regards to, you know, a venture capitalist investment. There's concerns over the future of the Six Nations. There's concerns over obviously what happened with the Saracen salary cap, the basic collapse of Super Rugby as the transcontinental franchise system into the more national based competitions, the rebranding of the Pro League into the United Rugby Championship. they've just rebranded. They're flogging a dead horse because the Welsh situation with their finances is crippling. They just rebranded the product. It's still a flawed financial system that the what is now the United Rugby Championship, which was the Pro League, formerly the Celtic League, has in place. Um, the fact that the South African um, teams have issues, COVID and otherwise, the breakdown in the whole of basic professionalism in rugby union. This is where I think Augustine Pichot was onto something when he was standing for election to World Rugby against Bill Beaumont a couple of years ago. In his manifesto, he said there is a money problem. We need to balance out the cash more evenly. The top end talent does need to take a slight trim of wages, so as in the highest paid talent. So some of the lower paid talent who may be equally as skilled can get a decent wage, and the money can be more evenly distributed. Um, oh yeah, look, if you were comparing club rugby union to club rugby league, and I think this is where I think the NRL is winning. I use Australia as a prime example. So A, because I follow the NRL religiously, I'm a massive fan of that league. I'm a massive fan of what some of the many of the things they're doing. I have reservations about one or two issues within the NRL, um, but if you compare the domestic game in Australia, there is no argument that crowd numbers before COVID were in trouble. Rugby Australia was in a mess. The Israel Folau situation didn't help. When it comes to grassroots growth of the game, rugby union in Australia is bleeding talent to the two big rival sports leagues in the AFL and the NRL. There's a whole host of players currently playing in the NRL who at some point were playing youth and schoolboy level rugby union and then decided to go with rugby league. Same in the women's game as well. There are several high-profile women's players in the Australian game, which you may not have heard of, but I can name Billy Boyle being one who used to play. She did play rugby union until a couple of years ago. A whole host of players, past and present, who Cooper Cronk, future and also one of the best halfbacks the game has ever seen, was a youth rugby union player. Clint Gutherson, youth rugby league, rugby union player, who's now the Parramatta Eels captain. There's I think a couple more. I forget his name now. Angus Crichton, rugby union player. You know, he's now playing league for the Roosters. Was at South Sydney, so that there is a significant talent drain from union at youth and amateur level, and schoolboy level, and into league. The Super League does have issues. That's more money based rather than and catchment area. They should have obviously expanded in the south of England more than they have in the Midlands. Obviously, with the London Broncos going part time, that is a concern. That's money based. That's not due to lack of effort on the field. And the London Broncos have done really well with their academy. I think their last Super League season, 8 of their starting lineup on that final game were local talent that had played union at some point or other sports and had been enticed to come over to league, partly because they get a slightly better starting wage at the lower level. Same with the AFL and the NRL in Australia. The Sheffield Shield the quality is not great, and for many years in the build up to COVID, the crowd numbers of Super Rugby were absolutely appalling. Shocking. If you watch Super Rugby in 2019, look at the amount of empty seats at stadiums in South Africa, in Australia, and to a certain extent in New Zealand. You would think New Zealand they'll be mad for both codes of rugby and cricket, and there were empty seats. So this is not a new thing. And then obviously on the backdrop of struggling attendances and the Australian national side, declining, which there is no doubt they're not the side they were. The talent is not what they were, and they were paying massive over the odds wages to rugby league talent on short term deals to get them to switch codes, which I can name Lottie Takiri, Wendell Saylor, Matt Rogers, to name a few, Israel Folau, to come into rugby union to be basically a talent stopgap. And don't get me wrong, Matt Rogers could play either code, brilliant player. So Wendell Saylor, brilliant winger, but watched an interview with Wendell Sailor, and he basically said he just couldn't get, he had to completely learn a new style of play. He didn't get involved in, you know, the game because of where his position on the wing. He got involved with the ball less defensively. He was involved less. Whereas in league, you'd be doing multiple carries, touch the ball 20, 30 times, 150 plus run meters. Union, he might get the ball twice. Same was said about Sam Burgess. Sam Burgess didn't particularly do well in Union because he was at Bath. They wanted him in the scrum because he's a forward in league. But at international level, they put him in the centres. And he sometimes he'll make 3 tackles and touch the ball twice, and he just was like, "This is not what I'm used to." So, and I think the only real the two best league converts to Union, Jason Robinson and Chris Ashton, because they keep their league style of play where they just come into the line. You could argue, Andy Farrell has done pretty well, not so well as a player, more as a coach, but again, reasonably successful. Leslie Varnicola was a complete mess. Coming over from the Bradford Bulls into rugby union didn't work. So when you've got international union sides basically going, we have a talent gap. We'll get the leagues to come over and fill that gap. That is a concern. Now England not so much. I mean, England as a rugby union nation, the talent pool is there. Biggest union, most registered players, wealthiest union. There was a short-term talent gap in regards to top-end talent, but the players were being produced. In regards to clubs in Yorkshire, Bradford Bulls are in a mess. That's not new news. They were financially mismanaged off the field. It wasn't to do with the players. It was to do with the ownership. Same with Widnes. Again, not to do with the players, to do with the ownership off the field. And this is well before COVID. This is when rugby league was actually a pretty solidly supported sport. The TV deal was making money. The clubs were having better revenues, better attendances. The quality level was higher in the 90s and the early 2000s. Bradford and Widnes, in the last decade or so, that is concerning. Odsal was basically was a speedway track, as well as a rugby league stadium and multi-use facility, and of course the condition of it not great. The RFL now own the stadium. They're playing at Dewsbury, where the Dewsbury Rams play. They're ground sharing with a lower level club. Wakefield Trinity, their stadium is diabolical. So yes, the infrastructure isn't great. There isn't the money to sustain it. Widnes council own their stadium, so there is an investment issue. And when times were great, Super League and Championship and League One clubs didn't properly invest when they had the money. Now the money's dried up. The infrastructure is crumbling. I feel sorry for the Bradford Bulls fans. I do. But that's down to really shocking financial management and poor ownership, which we are now seeing obviously more and more. Rugby union is also making massive losses in Europe, apart from France, where wealthy benefactors and it has a good TV deal. Yes, rugby union is in trouble. London Welsh, a prime example of a team that basically imploded badly. The first time they were in the Premiership, they were well run, but the second time it was bad. Castleford and Wakefield, Wakefield especially, massive problems with infrastructure there. That stadium is not a great. It's historic. Let's not lie, but it's not in the best of condition. The London Broncos don't have a home ground. They're using the Trailfinders Stadium in Ealing. They were at the Stoop for a while, so they've not got a permanent home. They keep having to lease and ground share. Some of the infrastructure isn't the best. And you could actually say some of the infrastructure in the NRL isn't the best as well. Some of the stadiums are looking a bit tired and need investment. The difference is the NRL clubs, most of them actually have money. The league has money. Whereas the Super League, you could argue the TV deal was actually shocking. Players who've played in both leagues and gone over to Australia, especially the Aussie and New Zealand players who obviously spent some time here, have said the TV deal was they don't always have video ref at games. Um, the quality of playing surface is not the same. The the training facilities and infrastructure are not the same, apart from a handful of clubs. So there is definitely infrastructure issues there. Even clubs like St Helens, and then until the JJB or DW Stadium was built, Wigan Stadium wasn't great back in the day. Um, Headingley's had a bit of an overhaul. So Leeds have been well run. Maybe they're not doing as well on the field as they used to, but they are a well run team. York have got a new stadium now. Um, I don't know where the Sheffield Eagles play, but they've had some stadium issues as well. Salford have the ground share with Salford City Football Club. So a lot of the Super League and Championship teams are leasing their stadiums, and the infrastructure there isn't great. And there is Halifax's stadium is in a terrible state. Um, Really not in a great state. I've watched some Halifax games on the telly. Jesus, I feel sorry for fans having to go into that facility. It is not great. I think the AJ Bell is a decent facility, absolutely. There are some clubs that are well run and have good facilities, and then there's other clubs that Castleville are a really good side, but they just do not have the money to sort out the infrastructure. Same way, I think it's Hull KR have got a really ropey stadium. Hull City have got the good one, Hull KR have got the poor one. Um, Fans keep turning up. The attendances in Hull are really good, but yeah, there's a difference in infrastructure between one stadium and the other. The KC Stadium and KR Stadium is just chalk and cheese. One is a really modern facility, one is falling apart. And that's no slight on the clubs. I mean, it's because of the money situation. Um, Toulouse's stadium is tiny in comparison to Catalan's, but they are more better maintained facilities with the cash that they have. Um, Go over to Australia. There's a lot of investment. I mean, Cronulla are rebuilding their stadium. Parramatta and West have got, um, West Bank, the new Parramatta Stadium, brilliant facility. Brisbane have obviously got Suncorp, the new Lang Park. Townsville, they've got the new Queensback Country Stadium. So yeah, there are some really good facilities in Australia. There are some that could use a lick of paint and a bit of a refurb. Penrith have got some investment because it's actually council owned. Brookvale was getting some investment with the new stand. So in Australia, they are now investing in their infrastructure. Um, they're rebuilding stadiums, they're modernising them. Here, there's clearly a cash issue, and there's also a talent issue as well. The quality of play in the Super League is not the same as the quality of play in the NRL, and the gap is growing every week. Um, the World Club Challenge, you just look at the for and against for English Super League clubs and NRL clubs, that it's not even an equal battle anymore. So I don't know what Super League and the rugby football. I mean, the Rugby Football League is banking on the World Cup, full attendances, fan parks, money coming into the game. They've obviously got the government loan, which they've got to pay back as well, and delaying it by a year is difficult because there will be interest on that loan. Admittedly, it was an emergency loan, but it has to be paid back and in full. It's a question about how the RFL pay it back. It didn't go to the Super League that loan, but the World Cup is crucial to the infrastructure development and money coming back into the game. But it is rugby union is going down the same route as football at various levels, and rugby league in this country and to a certain extent France as well is heading the same way, which is very, very troubling. So there is concerns in regards to the health of some sports, in fact, a lot of sports in this country. Um, the pandemic in the last year and a half has exposed a lot of issues in regards to the finances, the management, the governance, and the health of a lot of professional sports. We haven't even gotten to amateur sports, and as we were talking about the other day, grassroots facilities and local facilities that basically keep the sports running. Um, there are investment issues. There are concerns over local authority owned facilities that where local authorities, if you look at Slough, they've got to slash and sell off loads of facilities to private ownership. Um, Bracknell Forest, where I used to live, there were concerns over there's concerns over some of the sports centre and some of the sports facilities, and a bailout for the company that is running the contract. Obviously, the ice rink is gone; that was private owned, and the council refused to get involved and refused to assist, even though compulsory purchase schemes do exist. That's now mothballed, and there's a likelihood that the whole site is going to be completely blitzed, turned into an industrial estate because it's a brownfield site built on top of an old brickwork. So putting houses there is not necessarily going to happen. There's a risk of subsistence. So that entire all that land is likely to turn into warehousing factories. Issues with Basingstoke's ice rink, with the council and the current owners at loggerheads over development of that entire site, which also contains other facilities. Swindon, I don't know who actually owns. I think it's the League Centre. Whether that's privately owned or publicly owned, I don't know. There was issues in Bristol. Uh, there was issues with Romford with their rink, which took many years to get planning permission and built. Brilliant facility, by the way. Streatham is council owned. So, and this is just from personal experience. You know, Widnes, yet the ground at Widnes with the Vikings is owned by the local council up there, and there's a lease agreement, and there's concerns about the ongoing future of that facility and Widnes being tenants. We've seen issues, obviously, with the Ricoh Arena in Coventry, with rugby union and football and Sisu, and a complete and utter mess with who gets to play where and the lease there. That's an ongoing issue that's still not completely fully resolved. I know it's more stable now than what it was um, a few years ago, but Coventry City have been affected, and I think Wasps now fully own that facility. They bought it off Sisu. There was issue and the whole mess that was the Ricoh Arena from day one. Actually, never left Highfield Road, but that was a decision taken by Coventry City Football Club and Coventry City Council. In order for that facility, there was a partnership program, a development program. There was issues with the ownership of that facility from day one. So yeah, I mean and we had the Glasgow plan, and with the Brayhead plan, the SSE Arena in Glasgow. There's concerns about the long term future of that facility because the owners of that facility have gone into administration in the last 12 months. So in British ice hockey, who's this? Hang on a second. Hello. Yeah, I will do. Yeah, I've just got to sort some paperwork out for a few bits and pieces. I know. I have a way. Yeah, I know. I'm going to hand in my resignation. I've got to. I can't physically get to work without my motorbike. There's no public transport in the morning. I've got no money to fix it. I mean, I'm looking for work more locally immediately. You need it in writing. Well, I'm going to come to the meeting tomorrow because I actually need you as a reference. I need to fill some paperwork in, and I'll get it in writing for you today. So I will come to the meeting tomorrow. I just need to get you as a reference for my application form for a new job. Um, I do apologise for all this, but I just physically cannot get to work, even if I was. It's just scotch that. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I'll see you tomorrow morning. And I'll bring all that in. So get all that sorted. All right. Bye. I've quit. So yeah, I've just quit my job. um, um, yeah. The Link Arena in Swindon. The facility isn't necessarily the best. It's in good condition. It's not necessarily the best. There's obviously an attached shopping centre there, so obviously there's an income coming into that facility. Um, in regards to other stuff, yeah, there's loads of facilities, and in regards to sorting those facilities out, whether they're privately owned, as we found out in where I used to live in Bracknell Forest, or publicly owned with Slough, they did spend a lot of money on refurbing the Slough ice rink. And there's a private company, Sports Active, which is also running not only that ice rink, but also the Bracknell Sports Centre. And there's been concerns over the financial viability of that company fulfilling its contracts. That is a concern. The fact that, yeah, facilities are being closed, that is a deeper concern in regards to um, long-term funding solutions, long-term um, solutions in regards to um, making sure they're viable. Yeah, I just quit my job, by the way. I just, yeah, I told him I wasn't going to come back. I need to do it officially, but yeah. But there is a concern over, yeah, council run and privately run facilities. The fact that, yeah, the SSE Arena in Glasgow is the owners of that, even though it's a sponsorship agreement, are in difficulty. Bracknell Ice Rink, the John Knight Group, they had similar issues at Bristol and I think Plymouth as well with some of their facilities. You know, there's been issues over the running of by Planet Ice of bays and stuff. When you have private ownership and lease agreements with sports teams and public access, and you have obviously public ownership again with leases in place, so contracts in place with facility use, um, it is a question mark that and a solution that does need to be found. There is no doubt on that. The wider implications are quite serious. And now what we're seeing with like Valencia in Spain trying to rebuild their stadium, that's been going on for 20 years. There's been massive funding issues in regards to rebuilding that stadium. It's half finished. It's they've stopped work multiple times. Suppliers and builders haven't been paid, and this predates the financial crash. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, when you have political parties that want to invest in infrastructure, unfortunately, in the past, right wing and left wing parties tend to be populist, and there tends to be hard socialist or fascist policies behind back to work schemes in that regard. The only, I think, historical example of public work schemes that were done for the social benefit is the Roosevelt, New Deal, um, which in the 30s into the 40s, and eventually it was wound down in the 50s under Eisenhower. So the New Deal politics of Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower, I think, is the only example of a national government doing an infrastructure project without it sort of being left or right wing, in the sense, because even opposition parties who were opposite to Roosevelt, who were standing against him in elections and be it state and national level, were also proposing very similar ideas on the New Deal financing. And three successive presidents basically carried forward that policy long term, and that's how the American highway system was built. That's how Amtrak came about to being a rail company and still exists. That's how the 401k system was put in place. Yeah, Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, all of these dictators have used public works as a populist scheme in order to get the unemployed working, and keeping them busy so they can't revolt. And they put it in massive industrial schemes, mostly aimed at rearmament, unfortunately. But yeah, Mussolini had the marsh draining outside Rome for agriculture and land reclamation, and around Venice. Hitler had the autobahn scheme. Stalin had the 5-year plans, and set targets and infrastructure programs. The Trans-Siberian Railway is another one, which was actually completed under communism in full, but was started under Tsarist regime. But the public work schemes, they come, they're awkward. They are very awkward, because a lot of public work schemes have actually been done by private investment in the past, especially in democracies. When the government comes out the motorway networks of Europe. A lot of them are public work schemes. You know, national service in some way, yes. Uh, that again, there is state involvement. Um, you know, we've seen obviously Crossrail is another one where public money's been pumped in, and a public limited company has been put in place to oversee with private contractors over budget. This is what happens in democracies. We've seen it across the developed and developing world, be it state aid or whatever. But yeah, the question mark over the the infrastructure put in place, and especially for sports facilities and recreational facilities, it is what it is. I mean, that's more of a discussion for the other channel. If I'm brutally honest, how public work schemes and public funding, um, we've seen it here. We've seen it in Europe a lot post World War Two. Um, you know, the 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 renationalisation of industries, the denationalisations and privatisations of industries could be classed as public work schemes as well. Um, there's been back to work programs. Obviously, the furlough scheme is, I think, could cover that, and of course, professional sports teams using that as well is something. Um, in regards to Grubauer in the NHL, it's pre-season. I don't put too much faith in pre-season. Obviously, with what's happened the last couple of years with disrupted play and obviously restrictions on movement and quarantines, especially if you're a goaltender, the mental side of the game can prove problematic. We've seen it with a whole host of goaltenders. Grubauer, you know, he's a player who's obviously moved around a little bit in recent seasons. He's got to obviously get used to new defensive systems, a new set of coaching setup, new teammates. New responsibilities. Fitness could be an issue. So pre-season training is pre-season. These games are just get the players can just get a bit of match fitness. The regular season hasn't started yet. It's pre-season. We don't know what's happening in training. We don't know if players are fully 100% fully fit. There's teething problems at this time of year. I don't put um, too much into pre-season play and pre-season. It means a certain amount. It's more match fitness and match readiness and physical fitness and working with new players coming into a team. Working with training camp, but not of new faces there. Young players, free agents have come in. So there's a lot of gelling for the team to do. This is where a coach can work out his best starting team. I would be concerned if he's playing like this a month into the season, into the regular season. But when you're a goalie, doesn't matter if it's football, ice hockey. If you are a key position like that, the last line of defence, you're going to get a lot more spotlight on your performance. I think it's a new. I think it's a new environment, new coaching setup, new systems, new teammates. It's getting used to new relationships with new people you may not have played for or against before. Yeah, it's obviously the ice surface. It is pre-season. Let's not judge him just yet. It's a couple of games in. Training's one thing, playing against opposition is another. Some of the players he's playing against, he won't be playing against regularly. Some of his teammates may not obviously be in the side come the first proper game of the season in anger. It's a new team, new environment. He's got to meet new people, work with teammates he would have been playing against who he may not know personally. New systems. He's in preseason games. He got a lot of AHL and ECHL and draft pick players who come from the juniors wanting to get a spot. So he's playing against players who he may not have played against before. And as a goaltender, yeah, getting the jips is not nice. Losing, he's a confidence goalie. He's got to get his feet settled and get settled in his new team. Um, but it is what it is. If he's having issues when it comes to when games matter, so the regular season and postseason, that's when you can go, okay, there's a concern with this player. Is there a personal issue? Has obviously operating in a COVID player, the divisions last year, obviously getting used to not being in a full bubble with the border being open and a full season ahead where he's had a shortened season or two disrupted seasons. That can have an impact. Obviously, yeah, I can tell you now, mental health is a big thing with what's happened over the last couple of years from personal experience and all that. And a new environment can be actually quite daunting for some players. It can take a while for them to get comfortable with their teammates. There may be issues within the locker room that we're not aware of. He might be working with a new goalie coach, for example, that he's never worked with before. There are other goalies wanting to get that starting spot. He's not guaranteed to play the first game. He might be not fully fit. He might have a niggling little injury. It's training camp. It's been back on the ice, 2 disrupted seasons. We have noticed some players have benefited, some players haven't. But yeah, give it time. Look, when I was going to games regularly at the Bracknell Ice Rink, I would notice some goalies good, some goalies bad. One of our goalies was actually terrible. One of our goalies was really solid, really decent. You look at the save percentages, the backup was actually better than the starter. I know it's a lower level and it's less professional, but the backup has now moved on. The starter, who was woeful, is still there. His save percentage is absolutely atrocious. His technique is poor as well. And I've been at games where other fans have gone, his technique is shit. And there was one game I went to where there was actually a Polish guy who was actually a goalie. He was looking to as a free agent. He was just there to watch. He'd taken some time out due to an injury. And he go, your goalie's crap. Your goalie's got an issue on the 5-hole with his stick placement. I went, yeah, no. He goes, he's aggressive, but he has technical issues. And I was like, yeah, no. He moved on and played better at the new team he was at. We get a goalie who's played in the Elite League, drops down a league, and his technique was absolutely diabolical. He cost us several games, and I'm like, Christ. So you pick up on these things. Oh, on green friendly, I do think there's going to be a drive to make more sports venues more eco-friendly, more energy efficient as well, and that could have an impact on with playing style. If you're trying to make especially with ice hockey, which is very energy dependent on its arenas, a lot of energy, electrical energy, and has to go into keeping the ice cool, keeping the air temperature at a decent level so it doesn't fog up. You've got the air conditioning system, you've got the the air system. Very indoor arenas are really heavy energy users. Outdoor arenas, less energy intensive. But I do think, yeah, there's going to be a drive to make indoor arenas more energy efficient in a variety of ways. You can do that. Ice rinks are very energy intensive facilities. Very energy intensive. And there's no easy solution to go green. But Seattle is a very green city in a sense. It's very progressive in that way. There's debates over the politics behind Washington State and Oregon State and some of their political issues, but there is a drive, I think, to make facilities more energy efficient. Be it outdoor stadiums and indoor arenas more energy efficient. We're seeing a lot of older stadiums being refurbed and knocked down and replaced with more energy efficient arenas. It's not a new conversation. This is a conversation that's been had for many years now, many years, and sustainability is definitely on the agenda. Massive thing. but modern arenas are far more energy friendly than older venues. That's why Nassau Coliseum was basically just not usable anymore. It was the oldest arena still going. Madison Square Garden's gone and has had several refurbs. Madison Square Garden is the oldest current arena that's been used for both basketball and ice hockey in the US and Canada, and it is, I think, its last rebuild proper, the current structure, 64 is when groundwork was laid. It's had many refurbs since then internally to make it more efficient, but it is, at some point, Madison Square Garden will have to be replaced. The Rangers and I forget the NBA team that plays there. They will have to find a suitable solution. Favorite film? Goodfellas. 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 Donnie Brasco. Raging Bull. Casino. The Irishman as well. They're all linked together. All heavily linked films. They're all based around the same group of people. But Goodfellas. I like De Niro. I like Pesci. I like Ray Liotta. They're my favourites. But Goodfellas. In good question, but that's more for the other channel. Um, in regards to, yeah, sports facilities being more sustainable, yeah, a lot of old stadiums are being refurbed, rebuilt. Obviously, White Hart Lane, Tottenham, in the English Premier League. The old stadium, there was not a lot wrong with it, but it was starting to look a little bit old. It could have gone on with just a standard refurb, but they decided to completely rebuild and rotate the stadium. Um, Trying to think some of the oldest stadiums that are unrebuilt. There's not many left. I mean, Griffin Park, Brentford. They rebuilt a brand new stadium down the road. They demolished the old one because it just wasn't a great stadium. It was a historical stadium, but it was really, the infrastructure. It was old. It was creaking. Um, Vicarage Road, Watford. I mean, if you follow the Premier League and English football, a lot of stadiums have been rebuilt and refurbed and new stadiums built. Again, there's a drive to make them more energy efficient, more eco-friendly, more modern. And it's like Fenway Park. I mean, that is an ancient facility. One of the oldest baseball stadiums. Yeah, that was mentioned the other day. The Alexander Stadium. I mean, the original stadium. Yeah, needed massive infrastructure improvement, and that was done. As part of the reason why the Commonwealth Games went to Birmingham was the refurb, was the infrastructure added to the city. Birmingham is a city that has a lot of social issues and infrastructure problems. It's a city of 3.5 million people. It's quite a big city, actually. The West Midlands as an area, I mean, some of the facilities there are looking tired. There is no debate on the situation in regards to, yeah, the quality of facilities in the West Midlands. And yeah, the Alexander Stadium definitely needed investment. They've rebuilt it. It looks good. Same with the York City Stadium. Um, Again, just built for the Rugby League World Cup. Um, you could argue plans for Everton's new stadium replacing Goodison Park. Yeah, I have the history buffing. I do have the history buffing. I'm sure Chester can whack the link in for you. I don't have the link to hand, but I do have the history buffing. I haven't been on there for a while. I do a few live streams. Might do one there tomorrow when I get back from basically handing my notes in at work and going to a work meeting and sorting out some paperwork tomorrow afternoon. But yeah, there's infrastructure and stadium infrastructure is vitally important. There are some stadiums that, here in the UK and obviously in North America and Europe and South America, that need massive infrastructure improvement. That's what we're seeing in Australia. The new Bankwest Stadium in Sydney, state of the art, one of the best stadiums I think I've ever seen. ANZ and the Sydney Cricket Ground and some of the Sydney stadiums have been completely rebuilt. Obviously, the new stadium in Townsville, the Gold Coast Stadium, Cbus is a fantastic facility. Built by the same people who built Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. The old Lang Park was falling apart by the time it was rebuilt. So, there is a lot of stadium investment to make, stadiums more eco-friendly, more modern components used. And yeah, we are seeing like the Olympic Stadium in London. You know, very important with what was used to build it. There are a lot of stadiums that obviously there's a lot of arenas in the US and Canada. A lot of the baseball stadiums are really really old. Fenway Park is absolutely ancient. Um, there's a few other stadiums, in the LA area that are ancient. The old Oakland Coliseum, Jesus Christ, has fallen apart. There's a reason why the Raiders moved to Vegas. The facilities in Vegas are absolutely amazing. The old Oakland Coliseum, Jesus Christ, terrible, terrible facility, like absolutely falling to bits. The San Siro is going to be rebuilt yet again. Um, and one of them, I don't know if it's AC or Inter, are going to be moving out at some point with a new stadium. Um, the San Siro has been last rebuilt 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago for the World Cup. Now, it may look modern from a distance, but close up, it is actually a very tired facility. Um, the San Nicola in Bari, brilliant stadium, again built for the World Cup over 30 years ago, desperately needs investment, but there's no money for it. There's a lot of stadiums in Italy that are crumbling. The Stadio Olimpico, I think, is the best stadium in Italy, most modern, beautiful looking stadium in Italy. The Stadio Flaminio, which used to be the rugby stadium, falling apart. They never finished rebuilding that. It's just been left to crumble, which is a massive shame because that was a historic venue, very iconic venue. But they've rebuilt Lansdowne Road in Dublin. It's now the Aviva Stadium. Croke Park is another fantastic facility. I know it's for Gaelic Amateur Association sports, and the playing service is huge. You could play American football on that. But yeah, Croke Park in Dublin, beautiful stadium. Twickenham's obviously been redeveloped over many years. The South Stand is now completely gone. It's now a fully enclosed stadium. The redevelopment of Vicarage Road, the new Brentford Stadium, Etihad, that's actually 20 odd years old now. It was built for the Commonwealth Games in Manchester in the 2002 Commonwealth Games. So that's actually a really old facility in regards to current stadiums in the UK. St Mary's in Southampton, the Medeski. I remember going to the Medeski when it first opened. That's 25 years old. Nearly, I think it opened in '99. St Mary's opened in 2003. So some of these what we class as modern stadiums are actually nearly as old as me, or not much younger than me. I've been to Anfield when they were actually redoing the away end, and that needs a bit of a lick of paint. Still a fantastic stadium. Old Trafford, that's had regular, upgrades. I think the last upgrade was about 8 years ago. St James's Park, that is a fantastic stadium. Again, I think last rebuilt in the early 90s. Ewood Park, again, I think the last touch up was in the early 90s. Crystal Palace needs investment. Turf Moor needs investment. So when I'm talking about the stadiums here domestically, what we think of modern stadiums, I mean, St Mary's and the Medeski are over 20 years old. The Etihad is over 20 years old from when it was the first brick was laid for the Commonwealth Games. So when you're looking at British stadiums, some of our stadiums are absolutely ancient. They look really modern, but they're actually not as modern as you think. I think the most modern stadium currently in the UK, apart from the Amex in Brighton, which took almost 20 years to actually get planning permission fully built, is Brentford Stadium, the new Griffin Park. It and the life cycle of a stadium. I think the old Parramatta Stadium was built in the Persic Stadium. It's built in the 80s. They finally knocked it down. The old Palace Stadium, it's very similar in layout to Highbury in a sense. The old Highbury, just a smaller version of Highbury. Yeah, the Crystal Palace, Selhurst Park, yeah, could definitely use with a massive refurb. Obviously, look what they're doing at Fulham, at Craven Cottage. Obviously, the little cottage in the corner is a listed building, so they have to incorporate that in the rebuild. Loftus Road could definitely use a refurb. So we're talking about what look like modern stadiums, and actually, when you look up close, they're not as modern as they could be. You could say the Riverside. Riverside's only 30 years old. The Stadium of Light's about 20 years old. They look really modern, and they're actually really, really not. And if we are looking at, standing back a bit, we're looking at investment. the life cycle of a stadium now is about 30 odd years, 40 odd years. So the Medeski at some point will either be expanded upon or knocked down. The reason why some of these stadiums look very generic, circular or oval, is there's plans to obviously build extra tiers should the capacity be required and refurb be required. They're designed that way deliberately, um, whereby you can, you know, add on to the stadium. I think this is where Man United have got Old Trafford right. However, the upkeep of the stadium, regularly Man United fans are complaining about the state of the stadium, the paint peeling off, not in the best upkeep. Hence why there's a sense of distrust towards the Glazers. Um, the the situation at Old Trafford, what they've done is really good. They just refurbed, added on, expanded on the site. I've been to the Medeski. It's a very modern facility. I've watched many games of football and rugby there. I think the first game I went to was in 2001 for an FA Youth Cup game, a Youth FA Cup game, Man United Reading. I think Luke Chadwick was playing that day. Yeah, that's how far back I go. And the stadium had been open for about a year or so at that point. I think it opened in '99. I believe it opened in '99. So about a year or two old at the time. I've been there multiple times. It's a pleasant stadium. You can say it's a bit boring, but it's a generic design. But it's a nice all-seater, modern stadium where you're pretty protected from the elements. I've been to St Mary's the first season it was open. Again, similar in design. It's not a bad stadium, but the old Dell was really, by the time the Dell was finished with, it was in a terrible state. The layout was a bit awkward at the Dell as well. So yeah, they needed new stadiums. The old Elm Park, the old Elm Park was physically falling down when they moved out of there. When Reading moved out of there, the pitch was in a terrible state. The buildings were in a terrible state. John Medeski comes in, they build a new stadium. I like the Medeski. I think it's a very pleasant stadium, and they are building a train station right by the Medeski as well. So transport links to the Medeski will be a lot easier in the next couple of years. They are building a stadium, a railway station, literally right next to the Medeski. So in the next couple of years, getting to the Medeski, if you're Swindon, let's say Swindon Reading playing an FA Cup game, or eventually, hypothetically, let's say Swindon actually improve on the field and end up higher up the football ladder like they used to be. If you're a Swindon fan, you get on at Swindon Park. I think it's Swindon Parkway. Get out of the Medeski station, and you're right by the ground. So they are putting more infrastructure in place to allow better access to the area at the Medeski, which is good for the home and away fans, ironically, because a lot of Reading fans don't actually live in Reading; they live all around Berkshire and Surrey and Hampshire. So that will be a positive. The Kassam Stadium has only got 3 stands, partly because they run out of money, and partly because of the planning permission. Would I like a professional team in Berkshire again? That's a good question. It's a very good question. There are rugby clubs around Berkshire. I've played for one of them. It's all well. The situation with rugby union and rugby league, for that matter, as well, is at the lower levels the money isn't there. There's concern. We've discussed the finance problems and the money problems that rugby union and rugby league are finding at grassroots level. They were bad before COVID. And of course, we had the Rugby World Cup in 2015. What's happened to that legacy? Even though England didn't do very well, that was a brilliant tournament to watch. I loved watching that tournament. I really enjoyed that tournament. So where's that legacy? 5-6 years later, you have to question, the sporting legacy of some of these things. Because the southeast the south of England in general is the heartbeat of rugby union, and it's like the north of England is the heartbeat of rugby league. So, yeah, the issue is there's too many teams in London. That's been discussed to death. There's definitely there are. I mean, would I like to see professional rugby union? I prefer to see professional rugby league in the south of England more. To be brutally honest, if from a fan's point of view. But in order for like a Reading club, because there's a couple of clubs in Reading. There's clubs in Maidenhead, Bracknell. Marlowe's a bit further afield, but it's close to Berkshire. I played against Marlowe. I played against Maidenhead. I played against Reading Abbey and Reading Rugby Club as well. um, or Newbury. They were the closest, and Bracknell in the late 90s and Newbury in the early 2000s, I think, were the closest we came, other than London Irish, to a top flight. I think no, Bracknell did make the top flight at one point for a season, but that's the closest we've got to a regular top flight, in Berkshire. But of course, it's London. But a wider fan base for London Irish, which is basically southwest London, which is they're technically Sunbury, um, is where their headquarters is. So London Irish were just using the ground, but they were basically a Surrey, West London, Southwest London club, which they just had to go for the nearest facility, which happened to be the Badesky that could be used. Um, there is a good rugby culture. I mean, the Crowthorne Rugby Club is just down the road. The problem is money and sustainability, and unfortunately, that's just not the case. And that's been the case long before COVID, long before the Rugby Union World Cup in 2015. Money has been an issue, and this is the issue with professionalism. And I think this is one of the reasons why the Gaelic Amateur Association in Ireland, while yes, there's a political standpoint behind that and a social standpoint behind remaining as an amateur organisation for hurling and Gaelic football, and why some of their best players end up playing in the AFL in Gaelic football, they go over, and why some of the hurling players end up playing like in the lacrosse league in the US, is the lack of professionalism. But I think the Gaelic Amateur Association are looking at rugby union, especially. They call it a garrison sport, but they're looking at rugby union and how the transfer from fully amateur status to semi-pro to full professional hasn't necessarily fully benefited the sport at all levels because, and I do stress this, um, the the money hasn't been evenly distributed. And look at London Welsh. If you were like proposing to the Gaelic Amateur Association that we go professional with our sports, but we keep the amateur side of the game as well as a talent pool for professional side. You look at what happened to London Welsh. You look at what's happened with Saracens with the breach of a salary cap. You look at the issues with grassroots. That is a warning sign. You look at what's happened to Super Rugby. You look at what's happening to the domestic games in South Africa and Australia, and the struggles that they're facing. I think the only domestic game outside of Europe with rugby union that's doing really well, New Zealand notwithstanding, is Japan domestically because of the corporate investment. Um, I've played against Reading, the Rams. I have played against them in Sonning. They are brutal, brutal club. No, they play dirty. I have played against them. I had a bad injury playing against them. Not a big fan of the Reading, the Rams, but um, I've passionately followed the local teams for a very long time. I played for obviously Bracknell. I know the history of that club. They were in the top division for a year in the early professional days, and they just couldn't financially cope. It was too much for them. They still play at Lily Hill Park. The issue is money. And what is surprising is the RFU is the wealthiest union out of all of them. At grassroots level, there are massive, massive concerns. And back in the 2015 World Cup, there were, competitions being done so your local rugby club could get some investment, all that. They do that regularly. And massive concern with money. It's not the lack of players. I can tell you that for a fact. It's not for a lack of players and people willing to play amateur level, semi-pro level. Not for a lack of players. I can tell you that for a fact. There's a reason why Crowthorne set their own rugby club. There's a lot of people up and down this country willing to play amateur and semi-pro. A lot of people, and there's some really good players who I've played with and against who play in the amateur ranks and the regional leagues, and there's some good young players who play the odd game, but also represent their universities and schools. I've played with some of them. Like there's some army guys who played for the Army Navy in the army. I've played with some MOD guys who play in the Army Navy match at Twickenham. There's definitely the player base. It's money. It is money. It's facilities, and that's the issue with rugby union professionalism. It's been a mixed bag, and the concern with that is definitely sustainability. And this is what Augustine Pichot stood for when he was going against Bill Beaumont in the World Rugby election to run the game. Um, he was standing on the basis that the money needs to be better distributed, so more grassroots can get investment, and the top end talent needs to take a wage cut. He wasn't slating the top end talent because he said that they deserve to get paid, as in the top paid talent. But not all players are getting a sustainable salary, and the money cannot be sustained on the current spending levels. And then within like a few months, Saracens Saracens obviously had issues. So with the salary cap breaches, and then Super Rugby, yeah, COVID had an impact, but Super Rugby was creaking, and the situation with Western Force and the Sunwolves and the South African teams exposed the flaws within the Super Rugby format. So that there was definitely issues long before COVID, and as time went on, those issues were getting worse, and then the pandemic comes along. Professional sport shuts down like most industries did. So only key services were running, and a lot of countries still haven't come out of lockdowns and such. Look at Australia with their issues they've got at the moment. So just quickly sort this out. Hang on one second. Oh, you got a love voicemail.
Hi, Jonathan. It's Hayley from Simple Recruitment. I was just checking in to see how you're getting on with the application pack. Ideally, need it back as soon as possible. That way, we can get you started early next week. So if you could just give me a call back at 0330 Thank you very much.
Right, that's to do with my next job, so I will have to stop this live stream in a bit, but I will answer some more questions. I just have to make a quick phone call. Bear with me 2 minutes. Oh, hello. Sorry couldn't answer your phone call because I didn't recognise the number. I'm having one or two slight problems with one of the Word documents. I don't have a printer or a scanner, but my mother, who lives elsewhere, does. So we are going to try and get all the paperwork done tonight and tomorrow at the latest. I've just got to sort out. I've got one personal reference sorted. I've just got to sort out my work reference. I will fill in all the forms and then we'll send them over to you ASAP. Also, my notice period, I've already dealt with that, so I could start immediately once all that paperwork is sent over. Right. Yeah. I'm going to have a meeting with my former employer tomorrow in the morning. I can then get all his details as a reference on the form, and then I can get sorted, scan it over, and get it to you at some point Friday afternoon. At the latest. The other paperwork I can send over tonight. I'm just waiting on a work reference, and that's it. Oh, is that okay? I mean, then I can get all. Yeah, I've got everything else ready just to be scanned over. I don't have a printer or a scanner, so I'm using basically my mum's scanner and printer to get the stuff printed off. We're having to use the local Ryman's because our printer's a bit temperamental, but that should all be done this evening and then sent off to you tomorrow. What would I actually need for an induction on Monday then? Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I have multiple pairs of ballistic trousers. I've got high vis jackets, high vis jumpers. I mean, they're covered with my old work logo, but I've got high vis everything you could think of. Just sorting out some work boots this weekend. That's it. Yeah, yeah, not a problem. Thank you very, very much. Okay, bye bye. Well, sorry about that. Looks like I'll be starting my new job next week. So I've handed my notice in today, and I've had to start my new job. You're seeing this on live stream. Oh, this is how things work in Tory Britain. Um, yeah, so apologies about that. But no, when it comes to your grassroots level and investment and yeah, a lot of clubs. I mean, I don't know who actually owns the land in regard to Bracknell Rugby Club. I mean, I played there. I think the club actually owns the land and leases some of the other land from Lily Hill Park, which is a publicly owned this land, but I think they own their buildings and I think they lease their playing fields because they play on several locations in Bracknell. With some of the other Reading Abbey, I went up there a couple of years ago for a bike show, motorcycle show. They own all their land, otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to do open events like that. And they rely in the off season with such events, such as oh, well, I went to a motorcycle festival, but other non-rugby related income streams basically. And a lot of rugby league and rugby union clubs, if they do own their land, will open up to other public events in the off season. So you'll see car boot sales, you will see flea markets, you will see like motorcycle shows or public festivals like harvest festivals, small local little music festivals, open days. They do and they don't. There's a lot of ex-police officers who play for the Reading Rams, whereas Reading Abbey, that's more just middle class people really and local community. But I have played at both. I played against both clubs. It does, yeah. I remember Newbury, Vodafone had a lot of investment with the sponsorship and the rebuilding of the rugby club. They've hit a lot of financial problems. They're not in the best financial shape as far as I know. I think Vodafone pulled out their sponsorship in the end. They were pushing to try and get into the full professional ranks about a decade or 15 years ago, and that went a bit Pete Tong with the financial crisis. Um, but all told, in regards to off season, I do know a lot of rugby clubs and football clubs in the non-league will open up their facilities to other revenue streams where there's a car boot sale, flea market, or an antique sale, antique show. There'll be county fairs. I know Newbury, the county fair, they have used Newbury Rugby Club at times. There'll be like used car auctions. They will find other revenue streams if possible. And of course, COVID has affected that. Now, in 2019, when I went to Reading Abbey for a motorcycle show, there was about 1,000 people there. And yeah, there was barbecues going. The clubhouse was fully open to non-members, so you're paying full price for booze and food. But it's a revenue stream. It's how they can make their money on non-match days and in the off season. It is crucial to basically their lifeblood. Same with cricket clubs and bowls clubs, tennis clubs. They will actually occasionally open up their facilities to non-members on non-members days, where they will use their facilities for non-sporting related activities in order to make money. The summer camps, for example, scouts, anything that can make them money, charity days, they will open up their facility, and that is a problem. They are heavily reliant on non-sporting activities in regards to their business model to make money so they can then get through on their budget for the following season. So groundskeepers, the ground staff, community outreach programs, youth level stuff. They are heavily reliant on possibly schools renting facilities for school match days. So state schools may not have all the facilities that private schools do, and they will also the local education authority may pay a fee to have use the facilities. I know that much. No, look, I've been on the train going to Twickenham for the double header, and I've seen rugby fans from all over. There's a lot of London Irish fans outside London. There's a lot of Wasps fans outside London, Saracens fans outside London. When I went to the double header at Twickenham with my stepdad many years ago, we're going back a long time, like 15 years ago. We got on the train. There were fans from all over, and I've also gone into had to get the train for various reasons. And on match days, there's a match day on when you've got fans going to Twickenham or going to other stadiums because Vicarage Road was used by Saracens for a while. Wasps obviously and Richmond obviously had a couple of the clubs as well. Esher, you see jerseys from all over the country. I remember going into Reading and I bumped into a few friends. This is during the Rugby World Cup 2007, and on the train there were Northampton fans. This is just in the build up to so the rugby season still continued with the squad players getting game time, and I bumped into a couple of friends actually in Reading, and it was a match day with the London Irish playing Northampton, and there were fans from other rugby clubs just going up for a day out. Um, I can safely say that there's a fair London Irish fans, but remember we've got London Welsh as well who played in Oxford, so they will have and London Scottish and Esher. So there's fans in the Thames Valley that could possibly quite possibly support a Berkshire team. But it doesn't matter if it's a Reading team or a Bracknell team or a Newbury team. They're or a Slough team. God, Slough! Imagine that. Maidenhead, Windsor. Windsor have got a rugby club as well. Um, there are other rugby clubs. So the big population centres, yeah. Reading's got a couple of clubs. I know that much. Windsor's got one, Maidenhead's got one, Bracknell's got one, Newbury have got one, Crowthorne have got one. So there's two in Bracknell Forest. There's two in Reading or based near Reading. I think one's actually in Oxfordshire. So there's definitely a player base, and a community base. So there are fans here. It's whether we can get one of those clubs, not with a London name like London Irish or London Welsh or London Scottish, coming into Berkshire, but a through and through, like same with Wiltshire with Swindon, get a through and through local club to go through the ranks and make the Championship or the Premiership at some point. But it will need massive investment, and Newbury tried that and failed. Bracknell, in the early days of professionalism, made it to the old Division 1 top tier for a year and just financially just killed them. And then they just tumbled down the divisions very, very quickly. But I remember 99 2000, Bracknell had two teams in the top flight in their ice hockey and in rugby union. They're not there now. They overextended themselves and damn near killed the teams. We had we had a national champion in ice hockey, and we had a rugby union team playing at the top table for a year. It financially killed them. This is. I wouldn't go London Reading. No. I would go like Berkshire Royals or something, or there's a lot to do with the RAF in this part of the world with airfields. So the Berkshire Bombers, for example, like a Lancaster Bomber as the logo. I would definitely go with more of a Berkshire feel, or one of the towns like Reading, like Bracknell, like Maidenhead, making it, or Newbury, making it to like the Berkshire Stags, because the White Hart is obviously the symbol of Berkshire on the Berkshire coat of arms, and Bracknell obviously have the stag as their logo. That is something I think could Berkshire. Yeah, you could have Berkshire Royals or Berkshire Bombers or Berkshire Stags make it. Of course, I think some of those. I think the Royals is obviously trademarked by Reading, but there is a possibility if you were to do that, you would need massive funding from a group, an investor or group of investors. Absolutely, no doubt on that. Massive funding would be required on that end of things. In regards to a Berkshire team, I would rather it didn't have London in the name. That's why Wasps have dropped their name, because they're now Coventry. There should be Coventry Wasps, really, but it's just Wasps now. I would rather, if you want to grow the fan base on a wider basis, there are several big population centres which would definitely support rugby union. The issue is you've got to deal with Reading as a football club and the London football clubs, ice hockey with Bracknell and Slough. And they do actually have solid fan bases and are passionately supported. And then you've got Guildford Flames down the road in British ice hockey. So you'll be competing against two other sports that play at the same time of year. Brentford's only up the road, Fulham's up the road, Chelsea. They have a catchment area in Thames Valley. At the other end of things, you've got Swindon at the other end of things with the football. Oxford United and Oxford City Stars in the ice hockey. I think Oxford United would draw more fans. So the Sonning area, Reading, you might be an Oxford fan. If you're in Cowsham, you might be an Oxford fan. So if you are going to have a rugby union or even a rugby league team here, you have to be aware that you're going to have to start off with a smaller fan base. You're going to have to compete against established teams and established fan bases in other sports. And that's something that you would have to take into consideration. Absolutely. Um, the requirement would have to have a lot of money and a very good deal for the stadium. So whether Reading Football Club will be happy to ground share again, I'm not sure how that would work. I'm not sure how that actually went down in the end with London Irish with the ground share. That you have to bear that in mind that you haven't got a rugby stadium. I think there's the one by the railway line in Reading, which has also got the athletics track. Forget what Parker. I think is it Parker? Palmer Stadium on the edge of Reading by the railway line. It's smaller. I know there's another rugby club that plays there as well, or did. I believe London Irish did some training there as well, some open training sessions. But the Palmer Athletic Stadium can play rugby. You can play football on it on the playing field, but again, it's not the best facility. It's near Cemetery Junction, and you pass it on the railway line on the Waterloo Reading line. So I know the infrastructure of the area. This is getting weird. It's turning into an infrastructure video now. But it is possible, but you would have to have massive um, financial backing for it to be a success. Um, and it's whether you could find someone at this current financial time to do it. It's plausible. It is doable, but you would have to be aware that in the Thames Valley there are other established sports teams in a professional and semi-professional capacity that have established fan bases, the established infrastructure, that are established as teams historically, and you would have to challenge, that kind of try and get fans when you're playing the sport at the same time of year as these other sports. Now, if it was a rugby league team, you have less competition for fan base. You have to deal with cricket. If you're a rugby union team, you're playing in winter. You've got so many competing sports for that pound in the pocket and for attendance. And a lot of those people are pretty loyal to the sports that they follow, be it football or ice hockey or other rugby union clubs. It is, and the Bristol Bears owner, who I don't like at all, is trying to obviously raise the idea of ring fencing it, and a lot of rugby clubs are against that, and that is a problem. And that's where you need financial backing and sustainability plan in place in order to compete. And if Saracens were to win that this year, that would be an absolute shambles. Yes, it is nice to see the Bristol Pitbulls back, and obviously the Leeds Knights with that's a beautiful facility. Obviously, Bracknell obviously had to move to Slough and just become Bees. I think I put Berkshire in that name to get a wider fan base. It's, the ice rink at Slough is a nice facility. It's just a smaller facility, which means less revenue, which is a problem. But Bristol had the same issues as Bracknell do with the guess who owned the ice rink, the John Knight Group. So John Knight have had a history of doing this to their tenants a lot in the last decade and a bit. Um, hmm. The John Knight Group are a very dodgy company. They they're not the, the best. Um, right. Work related. Sorry, that was work related. I've just got to do a lot of paperwork tonight and tomorrow morning. I should be starting my new job next week. So yeah, I've had to sort a lot of stuff out. But yeah, no, I think there is there in regard, yeah, ice hockey. It's Casey. It's good to see you. It's been a while. It's nice to see Bristol Pitbulls back in there, like back at home, not having to ice rink share with Oxford now. Bracknell in the same situation. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we get a facility at some point. Um, um, uh, 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 but yeah, Manchester have had a lot of issues with their various teams. The Manchester Phoenix, obviously, they went out of business. They were altering. The Manchester Storm. There's been arena issues up in Manchester for a while. So the Manchester Phoenix going out of business when they did affected the league, the EPIHL at that time, and it had a knock-on effect. The formation of a new league, a restructuring of the league format. Um, but yeah, there's a massive fan base of ice hockey in this country, but facilities are the problem. And talking about setting up a new team, that Leeds ice hockey team, I mean, crikey, uh, the fact that Yorkshire is a hockey mad market. There's two teams in Sheffield that play professionally. That tells you all you need to know. Um, the facilities are not. I mean, there's some brilliant facilities, and unfortunately, it's not evenly spread across the country. I've been offered some work actually as a steward at the Slough ice rink and at the Spectrum in Guildford. My neighbour upstairs, my friend, does security, and I've been offered some stewarding on weekends. So I actually might be at some ice hockey matches, getting paid to be there. So we'll see how that goes. It's a little gig I've got on the side, but um, we'll see what happens. Obviously, in regards to British ice hockey. I mean, my friend Sam has been to a few games, the Bracknell games. So it's good to see the sport returned. Obviously, again, infrastructure is the problem, and where teams can play and grassroots. That's the issue that a lot of sports are facing. So if we want to have a professional rugby union team or even rugby league team in Berkshire, the fan base is there. Absolutely, the fan base is there. It's just getting the infrastructure in place and the money in place to get a team, be it an existing team or a brand new one, to get to the top. And one of the ways they could do that is merge all the semi-pro rugby clubs in Berkshire together, pool their resources. I think that's one of the only ways they could possibly do it, like a joint venture kind of club thing. The player base is there. There's enough rugby fans around who are there, but you've got to break them from their established allegiance, be it with the London clubs or the established order, basically. And there are concerns about the finances of the game at the lower levels. Yeah, there are some good. They are the good players have come through the British system. Just look at the World Championships, how the team are doing. There's players who played overseas in various leagues, and long may that continue. You know, one of the Pelini brothers plays for the Chicago Blackhawks. He used to play for Arizona, and he was born in Guildford. His brother has decided to play for GB, and he's decided to represent Canada. So there is definitely a good development pathway in place, and massive improvements in the sport. It's the infrastructure and the concern about team sustainability, like the Invicta Dynamos having to crowd fund to survive, the Milton Keynes Thunder and Milton Keynes Lightning having issues with Planet Ice at the Milton Keynes Weather Dome or whatever it is, ice complex. So there are definitely obviously existing concerns in place when it comes to sustainability, and I think COVID has highlighted some of those problems. If COVID hadn't hit, Bracknell would not have left for John Nike and Basingstoke. They might have found a better solution for fixing, their issue. Rugby league in Scotland is in a worse state than the Welsh. It's a concern. This is the problem where they did the not having the GB team for I think 12 or 16 years or something. That's the problem. What's my thoughts on the EIHL dropping the number of Brits down to 5 and imports increasing? It is a slight concern. It is a slight concern. And you have. I think Milton Keynes Lightning is the team in Buckinghamshire. Putting it out there, that's the nearest team I can think of to Buckinghamshire. I think is Milton Keynes Lightning, and Peterborough and Cambridgeshire as well, the Phantoms. I thought that obviously they're trying to protect the league and keep the league as competitive as possible. That's obviously a ruling that the governing body has decided to do. But it still means there's 5 British-born players or British registered players playing on a match night. So there's still a good proportion of the players playing are local. Obviously, the sport's trying to be a global game. We've not got players playing over in Europe and over in North America. I think Liam Kirk will make the roster for the Arizona Coyotes. I think he will be on the roster to come the start of the season. Let's not doubt that. He's a good late pickup, and that is a good positive sign for the game. But it's like quota rules. We've got it in English football. We've got it in rugby league and rugby union. You're allowed so many overseas and so many domestic players. I think it's a sustainability thing. And a lot of the imports are European, so it's not as if they're North Americans. Yet that's yet. The pre-season's a good couple of weeks. The season doesn't start for I think 2 weeks, so they're um, he will get some game time. Obviously, he played the World Championships. It is what it is. I mean, he will get game time. He will play. He's in training camp. He will get a shot. They will look at his World Championship numbers and go, he's going to be in the team. He will spend a lot of time at the AHL affiliate. He will not go back down to juniors. He'll be playing professional hockey in North America this season. I think he'll be on a 2-way contract, but I think he's very likely to make the Arizona lineup. Looking at how many players they've lost and their depth issues, he's going to get some game time. I wouldn't say it's sadly. I think very early in pre-season, we're only a couple of games in. A lot of the players who were playing NHL hockey and AHL hockey haven't played yet. So he will get a shot, no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. He's proven. Well, he was the joint top goal scorer at the World Championships, and he had 7 points in 7 games. That's a point per game player. And when you're playing against NHL and KHL level players and doing that on a team that's not winning a lot of games, he's on a 3-year entry level. He's gonna get a shot. It'll be, and also salary cap wise, with the salary cap issue as it is, he will get game time because it means they've got cap space, so they can pick up a free agent or a waiver wire on a bigger contract. So he will get game time. Have no fear in that. Have no doubts. He's gonna play. He will play. And I do believe there's some other British talent coming up. On the EIHL rules reducing the number of British players down and imports increasing by a couple. That's also a knock-on effect of what's happened on the continent because not all countries have had the same COVID vaccination program and fans in attendance. So there is a money side of this as well. We're allowed to have full indoor capacities now. No vaccine passports in England. Obviously, Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales might be slightly different, but we're going to have full capacities at games. So it could be to do with the fact that British hockey may be in a better situation to have fans in attendance, therefore make revenue than some of the European leagues. And obviously, with what's happened in North America, with a lot of players not having played for a while, they need game time. They need to get paid. So that's possibly why, as a short-term measure, bear in mind it's a global game. It is a global game. So in that regard, you know, it is what it is. And we will have to see how that impacts the quality of play. It might improve the quality of play, but there are, bear in mind, the salary cap constraints in North America. So some players are going to be cut from teams, and they still think they can play the game and contribute, and they want to keep playing and earn money. And because of salary cap constraints, there are players who are looking at the European leagues from North America to continue playing for a season or two, wind down their careers. That's another reason why I think the British League has done that. Plus, I think that also increases the amount of British players playing at the lower levels where money is less. So the import rules are going to be changing for the lower levels as well. So I think there's a knock-on effect in that regard. But I think that's a short-term measure until economies fully open up and the leagues fully open up and restrictions are eased and salary caps change, and spending rules change. And I think it's because we have full capacity allowed at venues. Even in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales, where there's going to be COVID passports and some restrictions, we're going to have more fans in arenas in all the leagues than North America, where it's a state by state, province by province basis, depending on Canada or the US. So that's going to have an impact. Their salary cap is staying flat. There's 10 teams over the cap. There's a lot of players who will be released from training camp and PTOs who still believe they can play. They'll come over here to Europe, and it's just about evening out that talent pool across. So agents have got to. It's. Do I watch the NBA? No, I don't. I've watched the odd game in the past. As a kid, I used to watch it more. I'm just not a fan of basketball. It's not a sport that interests me. I understand it's great. I'm not knocking the sport. I think all sport is great. There are just some sports that I just can't get into. I can't enjoy as much than others. But I've done NBA videos. I've got to look at the history of the NBA. There's a lot of interesting history behind the NBA. I don't hate basketball. I just don't like it. I wasn't very good at it playing at school, and it's not a sport that I enjoy watching. Truth be told, it's not a sport I can personally get into. But I've got friends who play it. I've got friends who watch it, who are passionate about it, and I've done videos on the NBA. It's just not a sport that I like. It's no slight on the sport. It's like I've got subscribers who are massive baseball fans. I just cannot enjoy baseball. I will watch a game of baseball for channel research purposes, and I've done that in the past to give me a feel of what's going on. I will watch baseball. I'll casually watch basketball. It's just not a sport that I enjoy massively. But I mean, if I was given the opportunity to go to Fenway Park, absolutely. If I was given a chance to see the Boston Celtics play, I would bite your hand off for that. So in that regard, yeah, they're still on Fenway Park and Yankees, Red Sox. I would happily go just to experience two of the most historic teams in baseball. Same with the Celtics and the Chicago Bulls, even though the Chicago Bulls aren't very good right now. Again, two of the most historical, successful franchises. The Celtics, they're synonymous with the NBA and what they've done for that league and their history within the sport. If you were to say, get your passport, get your visa, got 2 tickets, we're going to see, a Celtics Chicago Bulls game or a Celtics, LA game. Even if it's the Clippers, I would I'll bite your arm off. We just basketball. British basketball gets brought up a lot on live streams here, and the quality and the lack of, and the funding and the level of the sport and the Olympic legacy gets brought up a lot. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see all professional team sports in this country do well. I would love to see a successful, healthy British ice hockey. We know that's professional top level, and to a certain extent, the second tier has got some professional players. Rugby league, obviously, I would love to see in a healthier state than it is. Rugby union, I would, in a perfect world, I would love to see all these team sports do really well, develop, young people be active and healthy, and it's a great way to avoid gang crime and social deprivation. I would absolutely, I would love to see it do well. It's just not a sport that I like watching. Doesn't mean I don't want it to be successful, well supported, well funded, and do really well. What the British Basketball League does and what the federation does. Obviously, a funding solution needs to be found. A long-term financial solution needs to be found. Obviously, that and the funding is a major problem. Infrastructure is a major problem. Netball is with the university side of things, and British field hockey, again with the university side of things, have done better with limited resources. They've got a better TV deal. I think field hockey, I think occasionally is on Eurosport, so that definitely the media exposure is important. British ice hockey has been battling poor media exposure for 2 decades, and it has hampered the growth of the sport. But I can't see the British media ignoring the growth of that sport much longer. But the British media's obsession with football and the obsession with, to a certain extent, rugby union. I think is hampering other good sports. I've got nothing against basketball. It's just not one of the sports I like. Doesn't mean I won't. Do I think Man United can win this season? I think it's a very open title race this season. We're too early into the season though to have a say either way. Um, I think it's a very open league hunt this season. I think there's a lot of teams that could be in the hunt. There could be some dark horses in there. Um, do not underestimate Leicester. Do not underestimate West Ham either. Ironically, they actually have Brighton have had a good start to the season. So there's some dark horses in there that could upset the apple cart. I think Man City are showing a few signs of weakness. Man United, I don't think they're quite there yet. Liverpool definitely could use a bounce back season. It's, I think, more open now than in previous seasons. Let's just say that. I think any one of about 7 teams could win the league this season. People running the sport aren't competent in basketball in Britain. You could say that about a lot of sports in this country, even the ones that have got the money. Sports governance is a major topic on this channel and has been for years. I don't think the people running football and rugby union, rugby league in this country are competent, if brutally honest. And British ice hockey, there was discussions about the governing body trying to streamline it, rather than have it regionally like Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and all that. England and Wales are covered by one body, Scotland's covered by another. Northern Ireland, I don't know who covers that there, but I think a lot of the sports in this country are badly run. Okay, so yeah, the national side qualified for a regional competition. That's good. That is a positive sign. How they do in that competition could go a long way into securing further funding and grow the game. But again, the governing bodies, be it of the leagues themselves, so Super League with Rugby League, for example, Premiership Rugby with Rugby Union, and then the main governing bodies like the FA in football and the RFU and the RFL, there's too many levels of governance. It's all competing interests rather than having a streamlined governance system. In English football, for example, you've got the FA, Premier League, the Football League, and then the non-league. You've got multiple governing bodies in regards to who is in charge of what legislation, governance. Should I say legislation? Government, league rules, all sorts. Football and rugby. Look at the amount of teams that are in financial crisis. They've got all this money. The FA has got no cash. It's got loads of assets, just no bloody money. The leagues have all this money allegedly, but the clubs are going bust. Ice hockey, no. Ice hockey lurches from one crisis to another with teams going under and struggling, and as we've seen with arena issues for a variety of teams in the leagues. Infrastructure is a problem with ice hockey. We lurch from one team going out of business to another. So there's multiple teams that have financial issues. But hey, there are fans there, and the sport continues to survive. Obviously, we had this discussion last year, like with the league shutdowns and sports shutdowns, and the sports will survive. It's how many teams don't. And like obviously, Bury have gone out of business in the Football League before COVID. Derby County and Southend United are 2 teams that I know definitely have financial problems. Derby are facing liquidation. Southend are facing a winding up order from the High Court. So yeah, like the fact that no teams post COVID have gone out of business in any sport is beyond me. It really is beyond me. And I did say at the time, the sports themselves will survive. How many teams go under and what the sports look like is something else entirely. So the sports that are played, be it professional or non-professional, so amateur, will carry on. How many of those teams in the various, from the top to the bottom, don't is another thing entirely. Absolutely a separate conversation, separate issue entirely. And that's a conversation that's going to be regularly had over the coming, I'm going to say coming decade. Absolutely. By the time I'm 42, I do reckon a fair number of sports teams in a variety of leagues, not just in this country, but across Europe and across the world, will have gone out of business. New teams will have come along and taken their place. The sports that we watch will survive. the teams that participate in those leagues and sports, there's going to be some that don't. Um, that's just a fact, absolute fact. Um, there is an issue with of finances and all sorts. So and that's something that obviously we have to get to when we get to it. Derby County is the current one. That's the football crisis in this country. Barcelona and Real Madrid in Spain have got massive problems. Valencia's got problems. That's just three Spanish clubs. In Italian football, I mean, Parma and Siena and Palermo. I can name a whole host of clubs that have had to reform multiple times and had money problems. Well, that's nothing new for Italian football. That's been going on long before COVID. Super Rugby obviously is a prime example of a league that fractured, and I think two of the Southern Kings have gone out of business. I know that much in rugby union South Africa, and that's an example of a complete shambles that Super Rugby was by the end. Long before COVID, it had problems. And Rugby Australia is an example of an organisation that's got massive issues, massive problems. And I've done videos on that as well, and the situation that engulfed Rugby Australia with the Israel Folau and other money issues and sponsors pulling out, problems there. The NRL, however, talking about expansion and growing the game, whereas rugby union in Australia is in a complete and utter shambles. So there's better run organisations and badly run organisations, and rugby league has its problems in Australia. It's not all roses down under, and I've been following with vested interest as a fan, just as a fan of the situation in the NRL and the situation in regards to the ongoing situation with the expansion and the health of some of the joint venture. I mean, West Tigers. I mean, I don't know how long they can stay as a joint venture with their lack of success and the fact that they're getting worse. We have seen teams go out of business in rugby league in Australia and had to reform or drop down a level. It's a thing. New Zealand. New Zealand's it's a sports mad country with a very small population, so financially, how they can keep sustaining some of their professional sports is going to be interesting. But yeah, Super Rugby is an example of a league that just was, just had so many problems that when times were good, people ignored them. But by the end, before COVID, crowd numbers were poor, very, very poor, and the structures in place was not good. Has Champions League lessened the importance? No, it's the UEFA lessened the importance by getting rid of the Cup Winners' Cup in '99, the reformatting of the Champions League in '97, the reformatting of the UEFA Cup into the Europa League, and then bringing in more group stages, the Europa Conference League, which should be the Cup Winners' Cup. I think the structures of the European Cup competitions have devalued domestic trophies in Europe. So the cup competitions in Europe, be it League Cup or FA Cups in Europe. Some have been dropped. I think the French have dropped one of theirs. There is the issue. The formats of the European club competitions have devalued domestic cup trophies, especially the cup, not the leagues, the cup trophies. They've been devalued because of the formatting of the European club competitions, and one of the reasons why the European Super League, another reason why the European Super League came about this time is, well, some of those clubs are bankrupt, and they both, Real Madrid and Barcelona both lost in the Champions League this week, which was rubbing the hands with glee because a lot of fans were really rejoicing at that. The issue is, this is the problem, is the financial models and well, that's basically it really. I've been heavily critical. I think, to go back to straight knockouts, you streamline it, you would actually get more exposure for some of the smaller European leagues with their bigger clubs. It means more to win the domestic league in those smaller leagues, like the Danish league, the Swiss league, the Belgian league, the Scandinavian leagues. Some of the clubs have got a great history in Europe pre-2000. Then they get rid of the Cup Winners' Cup. They reformat the UEFA Cup into what is now the Europa League with a stupid qualification group stage process. The Champions League, you finish third in your group, you drop down into the Europa League. So devalues that competition and makes that a whole shambles. And managers are regularly complaining about fixture congestion, whereas the owners want to make as much money as possible. So player welfare is a situation as well. And then you see the domestic cup competitions like the FA Cup and the League Cup here has been completely devalued to pathetic, really. And the FA Cup, look at the amount of Premier League and Championship sides in the third and fourth round that put out weakened sides against lower league opposition. And it just devalues that. And crowd numbers, take COVID out of it. In the seasons building up to COVID, crowd numbers were falling. They've now got rid of replays. I understand that, but that actually financially impacts the lower league and the poorer clubs. So yeah, that's my view on UEFA's handling of the formats of the European club competitions. I love the European club competitions, but unfortunately, the TV rights and being fully behind a paywall has done nothing to benefit the game. Only those wealthy club owners. All they care about is the money. And in Barcelona and Real Madrid's case, they haven't got any. And they're coming up with these crack-brained, harebrained schemes to not benefit the game, but benefit themselves, the owners, the entities. They're bankrupt. And so that raises the question of what's the point of financial fair play? And it's not Alexander Serafim's fault. I think he's doing the right thing by trying to reformat and come up with new ideas for the Champions League, Europa League, and Conference League, and all that. Whether the right, he wants improve that side of things. He's giving that over to the Brains Trust. I think he's the right guy to lead UEFA. But when he came out very early on in his tenure saying financial fair play doesn't work, he's basically saying my predecessors have screwed this up badly. We've lost the trust of the fans and a lot of the clubs in regards to all the clubs, basically. Not all the clubs, some of the clubs. Hence the European Super League, and other clubs are going, well, this is not a fair balance system when it comes to the European Club Association, with some of these clubs that wanted the European Super League having far too much say and power in how the club game in Europe is run. And yeah, his predecessors have put UEFA, he's definitely the right guy to lead the organisation because he's from the new guard, not the old guard. It's not the old boys club in UEFA anymore. And that's another reason why these bigger clubs are trying to, force his hand. He stood up very well against them. But UEFA, along with other footballing governing bodies, FIFA being the senior governing body, are under a lot of scrutiny now following the Sepp Blatter and the corruption and the match fixing allegations and backhand dealings and corruption within the club game and in governance of the game. So there's pushback there. And there's definitely a lack of trust from fans. We're the fans with the governing bodies. Now, I understand the European Nations League format. Again, he's trying to listen to criticism of the friendly system and how pointless friendlies were being played. He wanted to grow the game with the tournaments getting a bit bigger. And while I don't necessarily agree with the European, Nations League, he's still trying to find solutions to problems. Whereas his predecessors created a lot of these issues. So he's coming from a weak base. He's trying to strengthen the base of UEFA. And I think he's the right guy. Some of the outcomes of trying to reform may not be what we all like and all agree with, but at least he's trying to do the right thing by his member FAs, and he's trying to with the Conference League. I'm not a big fan of it. He's trying to revalue the domestic cup competitions in that sense. Fixture congestion is another one. Player welfare has got to be first and foremost. Look what happened to Christian Eriksen. That's definitely now got to be pushed forward. But yeah, if I was going to be reformatting and looking at how European club competitions are played, straight knockouts, get rid of the group stage, bring back the Cup Winners' Cup instead of the Conference League, and you'll have every single UEFA member state have their champions play in the Champions League, and their Cup winners play in the Cup Winners' Cup, and the second best team, or the Cup finalist, or however you want to work out the coefficient, play in the Europa League. and therefore you get it revalues the domestic leagues, the chase for the title, and it also revalues the domestic cup competitions, which means teams will play full strength teams, reduces fixture congestion, and winner takes all. It shouldn't always be about the money. Too much money is in the hands of a handful of clubs. It weakens their hand and strengthens the hands of smaller clubs and makes it a fairer playing field, because then you get nights like, back in the day when Norwich were playing in the Cup Winners' Cup, for example, and UEFA Cup. Ipswich playing Cup Winners' Cup. And when I did my history video on Borussia Mönchengladbach, they won the Cup Winners' Cup a lot and the UEFA Cup a lot in the 70s. They were a very successful German side, more successful than Bayern Munich in the 70s. They were the dominant side in German football. I did a great history video on them. My God, the Borussia Mönchengladbach back in the day in the 70s were the German team, the fashionable German team. They won a lot of trophies in the 70s, both domestically and in Europe. They were brilliant. They were a trophy machine. Not so much these days, but they were a trophy machine. Eintracht Frankfurt won some trophies back in the day. It'd be great to see those names back in European club competition. And the way to do that is to bring back the Cup Winners' Cup, revalue the domestic leagues, reduce the power of certain clubs like Bayern Munich, PSG, who dominate their leagues because they can buy it, because other, you need to rebalance the power. The FA Vase has been devalued because the Premier League and Championship clubs can put reserve teams out in that, so it weakens that competition for the lower leagues. The League Cup, that's a shambles, and there's a reason why the viewership figures are shit, and the attendances are really poor. It's not free-to-air TV anymore. And the FA Cup, there's been declining crowd numbers for a while. We've lost the replays now. That's an economic necessity, unfortunately. I think that is the right way to go to reduce fixture congestion. But they've been trying for years. I don't think they're in the position to do now. Fans have said a resounding no. Absolute resounding no. Pure greed. And I think a lot of players on my internet stuff starting to play up. Fans turned against it really, really quickly. A lot of younger fans weren't for it to begin with, and then that very quickly turned. Very quickly turned. It's called misreading the room. You think there's some positivity. The surveys were flawed, but when reaction, and it comes down to the history of the sports. These are just only one club out of those 12 initially made a profit in the last full tax in full COVID. One club. One club refused to disclose because no club's forced to disclose their finances, and the other 10 all made massive losses. And what is interesting is 25% of football clubs do not disclose their finances. Well, look at the viewership figures when football's on free-to-air, the viewership figures with the Premier League games, even the average games like Everton. I think Bournemouth were playing a game against Palace or something, or Southampton. That drew higher viewership figures than the Premier League's ever seen. So, I think the pay will... And then bring that Premier League pay-per-view, that didn't last. And more people... I think it was Burnley. Burnley had... I think one of the Burnley games had 84 people bought that pay-per-view. Right? 84 people in total. 84 households bought that pay-per-view. Now, Burnley's a regional club, solid fan base in South Lancashire. Obviously, Blackburn's got a sort of fan base as well, or it splits the fan base in South Lancashire. But 84 people or 84 households were willing to pay for fans went, no. And they tried before with ITV Sport 20 years previously. It lasted a season. And it was a far more, in economic terms, it was £5 pay-per-view. Why have a subscription TV service if then you're charging a pay-per-view on top? That's why boxing's in problems. That's why people illegally stream. And the 3 o'clock kickoff blackout meant to protect attendances. We don't like that because fans can't afford to go to games anyway. Attendances have been harmed, but not because of the TV money of the 3 p.m. blackout, because of ticket price. And there's been reaction against that. So I think it is a popular sport, but there are massive problems. The money side of it, massive problems. And not gonna lie, how can the TV companies and the Premier League justify that? They very quickly, with the public reaction, they said it was for economic purposes. No, people just went, now we're going to illegally stream it. The ITV Sport failure 20 years ago led to Setanta, which led to Setanta's failure, which led to BT Sport coming along and picking up the remnants of basically that bandwidth. It's an economic thing. So ITV Sport comes along and doesn't last very long. They had the Premier League match, well, what we call match today. They had the Premier League highlights for a while. Viewership figures weren't great. ITV Sport going out of business, nearly bankrupted ITV, destroyed their share price. I remember the ITV share price was like about 5p a share. I mean, in theory, I should ask my mum to get me some shares. ITV's share price has gone up since then, so I could have made a lot of money if I was older. But at the time, I was 11, 10, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old. And I remember it. And I just remember ITV Sport didn't last very long. That bandwidth became free. ESPN and Eurosport and Setanta, all these other TV companies came in, be it British or not, got their licenses. They picked up the junk. The ITV Sport was the junk Sky didn't want by the end when it came to fixturing matches and other sports as well. That also contributed to British ice hockey losing its TV deal for a few years as well. And it affected a lot of sports. It affected the Superbikes. It affected MotoGP, which went to Channel 5 for a while, then on to BBC. It affected a whole range of sports. Then Setanta comes along. Then we have the financial crash in 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009. Setanta went belly up. Damn near killed Scottish football. A load of clubs had problems. Gretna, obviously, Rangers, obviously, Dunfermline being notable examples. Then ESPN had a slot. Then BT Sport comes along about 8 years ago, something like that, 9 years ago. And it picked up the crap that Sky didn't want. And then Premier Sports come in and are doing quite well, and the fastest growing subscription and free to wear with Free Sports broadcaster in the UK. And Premier Sports have worked out, unlike ITV Sports and having these massive production costs with studios and lots of presenters on big money, will have smaller production costs, be a bit more prudent with our finances and build slower rather than expanding too rapidly. That's where BT Sports got horribly wrong. BT Sports losing money from day one. Their launch was shit. Their business model was crap. They've lost the FA Cup rights from this season, which is a hammer blow to their image. They faced a lot of criticism from both Sky and ITV, and to a certain extent Channel 5 and BBC, because they used to have all the European club games in a shared, over the years, shared rights. Channel 5 had the Europa League alongside ITV, and ITV had the Champions League, and the Cup Winners' Cup was used to be on the BBC as well at one point, and the European Super Cup as well was on free to air. BT stole all that, and that actually goes against competition rules. Channel 4, BBC, ITV, and then eventually Channel 4 lost the F1. Now it's just one race a year live, free to air, which is the British Grand Prix, which is Silverstone's one of the worst circuits for motorsport. Terrible circuit. Layout's crap. Don't like the layout here. And if you're a fan, if it rains like it's been raining now, you're going to get very muddy, very wet, very cold. The logistics, the infrastructure on Silverstone is shit. I don't like it. The touring cars, I watched it last weekend. That was crap. It was crap. The national circuit is hopeless. The F1 circuit is not a good circuit. People go, it's a cathedral. The owners of Donington fouled up. They overextended themselves. The Dunlop Bridge, they were selling off the Dunlop Bridge in segments to try and make money to refurb the track. That was an iconic selling point of that circuit. Donington has been running to the ground. The MotoGP and the F1 were meant to go there. Not there anymore. World Superbikes and I think British Superbikes, European Superbikes still go there, but the Grand Prix racing has now left Donington and it's not the same. They got rid of the iconic Dunlop Bridge. The fact that the owners were selling off that in segments to raise revenue in auctions is depressing. Rockingham doesn't exist as a racing track anymore. The worst circuit ever built. never popular with me. Never liked the infield circuit. Didn't like the banking. You couldn't have NASCAR there because you don't have the safer barrier. Um, why? Oh, it's historical. It's to do with the old mill towns. It goes back to the Victorian times and the Industrial Revolution. You got Accrington in the middle. All three, the original Accrington, Blackburn, and Burnley are three founders of the Football League. It is tribal in South Lancashire. Burnley in the 60s were a very successful side. Blackburn, obviously, in the late Victorian, early 20th century, were a very successful side. Accrington, unfortunately, was stuck in the middle, which was one of the reasons why they went bust in the 1960s and were replaced by Oxford United in the Football League and had to reform. Like proper gnarly, nasty. Like it is not pleasant. Same with Macclesfield and Chesterfield, to do with the miners' strike. Even today, they hate each other. Mansfield, Macclesfield, and Chesterfield hate each other because of the miners' strike. Some refused to go on strike, went to work. Others went on strike, and that's where the word scab comes from. It's just a traditional rivalry between the towns going back to even before the Industrial Revolution. And it's to do with the region. It's just tribal hatred. Tribal hatred. It's the same with Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United, Sunderland, Newcastle. Palace Brighton is the weirdest rivalry though. It's not really geographical. It's just a really weird rivalry. That's just for some reason. And you look at the Palace Brighton game the other night. Got very nasty at the end with fans and players, getting nasty with each other. Millwall, West Ham. Again, it's to do with East London. Brentford, Chelsea, QPR, and Fulham. All of them ironically hate each other. Fulham being the weakest of the firms, but it's a traditional thing. Going back to before football was a thing. Going back to the industrial age, because each town we're trying to compete to get workers in. Various companies, all sorts. It's a long-standing rivalry. Got very nasty in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and 80s. In the post-industrialisation, always been a very, very nasty rivalry. Sheffield, look, Battle of Parliament Street. I remember watching that 2001 on live TV. And the rivalry goes back to the playing group splitting, but also Nottingham Sheffield is a historic rivalry when it comes to industry and investment. And in ice hockey, it is a hateful rivalry because they're two of the most successful teams in British ice hockey history. The Battle of Lower Parliament Street. It is on YouTube. It's 19 minutes of just violence on live TV. Wow, brilliant. Oh, get shivers watching it. And I used to watch the Super League on the old BBC back in the day. I used to have a game live on Grandstand, lunchtime game, early afternoon game on a Saturday or a Sunday. And I remember watching that game live on TV, and it was just a brutal slugfest. Most of the players at the time were North American, but they knew the rivalry between the cities and the history of the teams. That you get told that it doesn't matter what sports team you sign up for, the historical rivalries. It's like Espanyol, Barcelona, and the El Clasico. Espanyol hate Barcelona because Espanyol is pro Spanish government. That's the royalists of Barcelona. They're right wing. They don't believe in the Catalan independence, whereas Barcelona more left wing. St. Pauli and Hamburg. St. Pauli very left wing, anti-government. Hamburg traditionally more right wing team. They hate each other. That goes back to Nazi Germany. You've got Sheffield Wednesday still have Hillsborough. Still played there. The club have got financial issues, but Sheffield Wednesday's, Hillsborough's still their home, has been their home for 150 years. It's like Nottingham Forest, Notts County, they hate each other. You've got the county ground, and then you've got the Riverside ground. Even though Notts County aren't doing so well at the moment, that's the oldest rivalry in football. Sheffield United, Sheffield Wednesday, the Blue and Reds. There's the Sheffield Derby is one of the most violent. Preston Blackpool, I think, would be a rivalry as well, for geographical, but pre- football in Lancashire doesn't matter. But the, 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 the Battle of the Darwen Valley, as we call it, between Blackburn and Burnley is visceral. Hate there. Um, Makes Man United, Liverpool look like child's play. Trust me. Newcastle, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, I think would be more Grimsby. Grimsby would be Hull as well. And ironically, Grimsby Stadium is actually in Cleethorpes. There are some brutal rivalries that go most people outside of. It's like Lens and Lille. They had a riot the other day at the match in the northeast. That's the northeast France derby. That's a nasty. RC Lens and Lille don't like each other. Marseille and Montpellier. That's brutal. Toulouse Bordeaux. That's quite nasty. A lot of this is when North Americans don't realise when it comes to rivalries in European football. It's really nasty stuff. It's like Split versus Dinamo Zagreb, the two biggest clubs in Croatia. One's from Dalmatia, one's from Livonia. They hate each other. Yeah, Basingstoke. That's a horrible one. That's been brutal in the past. There's been some nasty injuries there. The Sheffield Steel Dogs versus anyone is generally quite nasty. Remember a Sheffield Bracknell game? I went to a hockey game and a boxing match came out. It was about 3 hours worth of penalties. It was about 5 minutes of actual play. The penalty boxes were full. There were suspensions, injuries. There was a headbutt in there. There was all that. Both goalies fought. That's an ongoing rivalry that doesn't go away. I love that rivalry. Milton Keynes and Peterborough. Yep, absolutely. Swindon. Swindon's a good rivalry with on the Thames Valley. Traditionally, Slough and Bracknell back in the day when Slough actually were in the top division. Nasty. Oh god, that would be a brilliant game to watch. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter what sport you're in. The rivalries are there, and this is what I think North American fans really don't realise how really tribal European club sport is. Um, it is absolutely brutal. Um, you know, football's the top one, but then rugby league and ice hockey and all, it gets nasty. Some of it's political. Um, it you just don't get it in North America. You get pissheads fighting each other, but you just don't get it. And the players do. The players know exactly what the rivalries mean. The original six rivalries, the Battle of Alberta. The fans get those little rivalries, but at the same time, the players definitely do. When you sign up for a Montreal Canadiens Toronto Maple Leafs game, if you're a player, you know you're in. Back in the day, you were in for a brutal match. The the rivalry with Vegas has happened. Um, the rivalry between Anaheim and LA, the interstate rivalry, as they call it. I forget what the interstate is. I think it's I-35 or I whatever it is. Brutal. The Islanders Rangers, any of the original Chicago St. Louis is brutal. There are some proper rivalries in there, and Seattle joining with Vancouver is going to be interesting. How that becomes a rivalry. I'm looking forward to that. I think the best one for me is the Battle of Alberta between Edmonton and Calgary. It's starting to become relevant again in regards to both teams that are fighting for playoff contention again. There was a long time where both teams weren't very good. In the 80s, you've got to look at the footage of the 80s. It's thousands. Yeah, I mean, look, if that's good to see that teams that play in the Scottish National League want to take a step up. But again, it's the money side of it. The player base is there, the fan base is there. Like Scotland has always had some great ice hockey players historically for this country, and a lot of them went over and helped grow the game in North America originally. So the fact that more teams are putting their hand up saying that we want to take that next step is great. It's just making sure it's financially viable for those teams to do so. With what happened with the Edinburgh Capitals a few years back, it's the viability to make sure that the Edinburgh Capitals were literally hopeless. I looked at the history of the Edinburgh Capitals and they were hopeless. Barely made the playoffs. Always near the bottom of the league. Money was always an issue. Players not getting paid. Really badly run, and that was the result. Was they went out of business. It was a massive shame, and it did affect the EIHL, and you know, no, the Wolfpack won't come. They're going to be joining the North American Rugby League. The Wolfpack are not coming back to Super League. The North American Rugby League. The Ottawa Aces were meant to join in next year. They're going to again go into the North American League that they're setting up. It just wasn't viable. It was a harebrained scheme to begin with. It's definitely it was a stupid idea to begin with from the RFL. They barely played any games in Toronto. They've got a great little facility in Toronto. They should have grown the game domestically, which they're now doing. The Wolfpack won't come back. There's too many. Won't come back, and it's a shame. But transatlantic, no, never. It should never have got off the ground. They should, the NRL and the Super League, and should have been looking at trying to grow the game in the US by strengthening what was a semi-pro league at the time, and now it's turning professional. They should have definitely focused on the North American East Coast, which is what they are doing now, because there was already a semi-professional league there. There was a player base there, and what we've now seen with the last couple of years, with the NRL being the first professional sports league to restart after the shutdown, and the AFL following, was Americans bought into that because there's sport on the TV, and it's a contact sport, and there is and with Major League Rugby starting up how it has and stabilising, that's definitely what should have happened. The Murrayfield races were already playing at the Murrayfield rink, which is right outside Murrayfield. It's literally in the car park of Murrayfield Rugby Stadium. The Murrayfield races were already playing there as tenants, and they obviously put forward their application to join the Elite League, just didn't have the finance behind it. But the Edinburgh Capitals was so bad. And the finance was so bad that the rink owners were like, get out. Well, yes and no. They've got to compete against baseball, obviously, in the summer, which baseball, while Major League Baseball has its issues, it's got a great established minor league system across the country. I think it's the most participated sport in the US, and to a certain extent in Canada. Cricket will have a very difficult battle to be fully professional and competitive and make money. It's a great idea, but I think baseball's too well established, even with all the issues baseball has. I think the only way to go professional with this is T20 only. I don't think the Americans have the attention span for a 5-day test match or a 4-day county style game, first class game. I think it will be T20 only, which would be great because you could have 2 games a day, absolutely back to backs. But I think T20, if they are going to do it, would be the only way you could have a professional cricket league in the US. But I don't know there's enough fans in the US for the sport. I don't know if there's enough players, domestic players at least, because you've got to grow the game with domestic player base to play it. I just don't think Canada, yes, because they are ICC affiliated. US, not so much. And there is a professional T20 competition in Canada. I have watched some cricket. It's not the best, and Canada do play at T20 and 1-day World Cups. The US, I'm not sure. I'm not sure with the US. Rugby union, rugby league, yes, we've seen the growth there. Cricket, I'm not so sure on that. Canada, yes, because it's a former British colony, but the US, I'm not sure that's going to work. It would have to be T20. It would have to have the funding. But I would like to see domestic US players play. I'm just not sure how many of them are of the standard. And baseball dominates the summer sports market in the US, and NASCAR as well. You've got to compete. And NASCAR, I love NASCAR. I really do. I love the changes they've made to the format with more road courses or circuits rather than ovals. And again, they're a license to print money. So in regards to cricket, I don't know. Could not tell you. But Major League Rugby's been a good solid starting point. Major League Soccer's obviously grown as well, and cricket's coming in. They're going to be competing against those sports and baseball, and I don't know. And with the economics right now, they had an opportunity about a decade ago, and they didn't do it. That was the plan. That was the plan. There was a meeting, I think this time last year or beginning of this year, in regards to the governance, having an overall governing body. There's a lot of players in the National League on two-way contracts. I've been looking at the squads. A lot of players on two-way contracts with some of the elite league teams. There was discussions, and I think it was Sheffield and Nottingham dug their heels and proved to be a bit difficult, and they have a lot of power within the sport in this country. So there was discussions at the moment. No, but I think it should be. Have an overall governing body, UK ice hockey overall governing should be the way to go. At the moment, the talks ended unsuccessfully, I think, from our point of view as fans. That's not to say it won't happen. We've discussed that with the NFL. We had NFL Europe. We had I think that moment's passed. I think the London series is as far as it will get now, because the NFLPA, I think the players will vote against a team. Won't be expansion because you've got a nice 32. I think it's a 30-team league. They might have a 32-team league. It's either 30 or 32 teams. They've already got a nice even-numbered league. It would have to be a relocation. That would have to go to the Board of Governors. And I think the players would also go, not in our collective bargaining agreement. So I don't think that's going to happen. If it was going to happen, it would have happened by now. I've done a video on it. It's on the channel. Will the NFL have a team in London? It's when was in the old house, have the whiteboard out. I break down the interviews given, the numbers, the plan, why it hasn't happened. Yeah, but it's crap. The EFL is crap. It's not good quality, and the crowd numbers 400. That's no way to make money. Not at all. Not in what's being discussed. It's just not viable financially. Not at all. And that sums up the situation. It's been it just won't work. They want to expand, but if you've only got a couple hundred fans, yeah, they did. Saheed Khan, question marks over that ownership group and bits and pieces there. Tried by Wembley, that went down like a sack of potatoes. A lot of negative reaction. A little bit of conflict of interest as well with owning Wembley and owning Fulham and Craven Cottage. Didn't go down well. They undervalued the stadium. That was the FA trying to make a quick sale because they were cash strapped. This is before COVID, asset rich. Taxpayer money went into that stadium. Really look. I've done a video on that. I've done videos on that as well. And there was no, that would be suicide because there's too many players in the NIHL on two-way contracts, so they wouldn't be able to play. They'll be exempt. Which team do they play for? You'd be getting 10-0 thumpings all the time. It would do nothing to develop the lower level and the upper level. Look, NFL Europe collapsed. It just doesn't work. You just don't get the crowd numbers. And the US are slowly withdrawing their personnel from Europe bit by bit under NATO agreements and government agreements between the German government and everyone else. I mean, we're pulling out of us and the French and the Canadians, we're pulling out of our base. I think we've got one base left in Germany now. I've got friends in the armed forces. Under agreements to do with the reunification of Germany and NATO and government agreements, a lot of overseas personnel are being pulled out of bases, and their bases being handed back to the German military and the German government. And the German government no longer have conscription. That's gone now. So they don't need all these bases anymore. So they're being deactivated, and a lot of overseas personnel are coming home for the US. So that's the thing. Alex Telles. Let me just double check on Alex Telles because I've heard the name before, and bear with me. I do apologise for being a bit a bit of a daft bugger. Let's get his name up. I'm assuming he's the football player. I thought I heard the name before. Shows how I'm not keeping. Alex Telles. Uh, well, he's 28, so you would think he would have been fully up to speed right now. We'll just have to see how he does with Man United long term. Man United are trying to get back to winning silverware for the first time in a long time. I thought I'd heard the name before. Obviously, he's been developed with the Brazilian league system. We'll see how he does. I mean, with South American players, depends when they come over to Europe. Um, they can be hit and miss. I mean, Diego Forlan, brilliant player, it just didn't work at United. Um, Veron didn't work at Chelsea, didn't work at United, worked at Inter. We'll see what happens. Well, yeah, the NFL said that about NFL Europe. Oh, we've got a solid fan base here. We can have a pro league, and it failed, completely failed. So, and there's less US personnel in Germany now than what there was when the NFL Europe was there. So when you've got US personnel off base, wanting to watch a game, and their families, yeah, but there's less and less US service personnel and their families in Germany now. There's a big trend towards bringing the troops back to the US, reducing spending on overseas deployments, and that's an ongoing trend. A lot of the NATO countries, formerly obviously the Allies that won the war, are pulling out of Germany. The Soviets obviously left in 89, 91. They left. Us, the French, the Canadians, and the Americans, we're slowly withdrawing. We've been withdrawing for years and years. It's been sped up in recent times. German government are taking over those facilities, either selling them on or decommissioning them. So while there is a fan base there, it's mostly US nationals and their dependents. So US personnel, they might have a German wife or husband. Look at the US national football team. A lot of their players play in Germany because of their parentage. That's where they were brought up. They're joint nationals. A load of them haven't even played in the Major League Soccer. Same with the Australians as well. They had personnel out there as well. But yeah, the overseas military personnel are slowly withdrawing from Germany. If the NFL Europe, which was professional, failed, I can't see how the EFL is going to succeed, or ELF or whatever it is, European League Football, whatever it is. I can't. We'll see. It's a time will tell. But financially, obviously, with what happened with COVID and all that, and strains on economies and spending power and spending parity, and yes, Portugal has the Portuguese league is now ranked fifth league in Europe over the French league. That is correct on the UEFA coefficient. And of course, Benfica proved against Barcelona last night that, guess what, underestimate the Portuguese sides at your peril. Just because the Portuguese league isn't at the same level as what it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s doesn't mean it should be discounted at all. They've got more recent success in the Champions League and Europa League than any French club. Discount them at your peril. Plus, they, the French, yeah. Look, NFL Europe failed. I think most of the fan base is due to US personnel being over there and their dependents, so families. They might have met a German partner. Yeah, I think NFL should stick to North America. Keep the NFL London series going. If they have an NFL Europe series where they bring games to Berlin or Cologne or Hamburg, absolutely nothing against that. But I can't see a league working long term. If it stays as a semi-pro or amateur and US personnel and their families play it and watch it, fine. But I can't see it being a financial success long term. Just personal opinion on it. I could be wrong, but with the current financial situation of the global economy, yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to work long term. Rashford, a big loss for Man United. Yes, he's a key component. He does well under Solskjaer. He gets a lot of criticism online. I think it's unfair, but he was playing injured for a lot of last season. I think that showed in the Euros. He wasn't 100% fit. He was playing with a double fracture in his back, for crying out loud. He's played a lot of football. the Euros took a lot out of him mentally. Yeah, I think he does need a bit of a rest and recuperation. No, look, Juan Mata does a lot of charity work as well. He's still a good player. Juan Mata's come out very publicly and said he's very disappointed by the lack of uptake in his charitable scheme. He's praised Marcus Rashford for his charitable work. It just shows these guys are human beings, and just because they're high-profile sports stars doesn't mean they don't actually have decency in them. Unfortunately, there is an entitled attitude amongst a lot of pro athletes. We've seen that in what's happened in the NRL over the weekend with the drug scandal that's engulfed the NRL and a couple of clubs down there, mostly the Melbourne Storm, but also the New Zealand Warriors. There's clearly a culture issue within dressing rooms. There's an issue of racism, homophobia, excessive drug taking. We know this is happening. I think governing bodies of a lot of professional sports were asleep at the wheel. Look what's happened with Mendy at Man City. There's definitely a very toxic culture which needs to be addressed. I do think football in this country needs to bring in a code of conduct, like other sports have, and other leagues have. There's far too many incidents, especially during the lockdowns last year, of players misbehaving. No, I think the media have portrayed that. I think Rashford himself is not political in any way, shape, or form. I think he's just doing the right thing, and I think any decent human being would do the same. I mean, I give to charity when I can, and I've raised money for charity, and I'm just an average Joe with not a lot of money. I've given to food banks, I've given to clothing banks. I'm going to go to a book bank at some point. I've got a lot of books to give away. I've done it before. I've done it with my mum. We've gone down a charity shop with hundreds of books and donated them so they can do. I mean, I think the media have unfortunately made him a political pawn. I think he embarrassed the government and the opposition parties into doing something. He embarrassed the political establishment. But these are long-standing issues, and to go, oh, it's a Conservative Party. That is, I think, an issue for the other channel, the history buffing, to discuss the political side of things. I think, yes, the media have warped it a bit. I think the media takes a lot of. I think the media take a lot of responsibility for the current fuel crisis we have. They're over-exaggerating the shortage of HGV drivers because guess what? Europe has the same problem with losses, and it's to do with how badly Europeans are paid. And the Haulage Association have been saying, I've got mates who work, in some industries in this country. They're very close to going on a strike, and then you'll have then you'll have a supply shortage. I think it's been over. The panic buying has been again something for the other channel, and I'm not a big fan of the mainstream media in this country or further afield for that matter. There's definitely an agenda there. It's nasty, it's toxic, it's insidious, it's divisive. I don't like it, and it's affecting sport. No, he probably ghost wrote it. Someone have ghost written it. I've got a few sports biographies and I've read a few, and there's a lot of ghost writing. You have to watch the interviews that they give saying, "Oh, I had a ghost writer help me." Not a lot of sports stars are very articulate. The reason why they became professional athletes, they were good at sport, they weren't great at school. And this is where now I think professional sports leagues need to put those education in place. Make them get, when they're in the academies, make them get part-time jobs, make them live in the real world, and they become more articulate. Rashford's come from a very humble background. Remember his background. You have to remember that. I do think the media have twisted it very much so, and it's a shame. It's a crying out shame. But his book was ghostwritten. But he's a decent human being. I have no doubt on his integrity. I think the media and the politicians have twisted it. Yeah, I think he's a decent bloke. I think the people around him are now manipulating the situation, and I think that's an absolute sham. He's not the first high-profile, athlete to be manipulated in this way, and I feel deeply sorry for the abuse he receives. I feel deeply sorry for the fact that his good deeds have been twisted for political gain and media gain. I think that's wrong. I do have a lot of sympathy for him. I do. But look, I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to sort my lunch out. I've got to sort a lot of paperwork out for my new job. Thank you very much for all your questions. It's been a good live stream. I will be doing some more videos later. I'll just keep my eye on the sports news. I've got a lot to do today and tomorrow. Could be very, very busy. But yeah, I should start my new job next week. it's more money than what I was on before. I'm coming off sick. I'm just going to go back to work, even though I've still got a lot of health issues. I'm just going to go back to work. I need to for my mental sake of things. I'm going to be cycling a lot. Um, I'm giving up motorcycle riding. Physically, it's damaged me too much. It's not all set in stone yet, but it's looking very likely I'll start next week, possibly Monday. So fingers crossed. I've got to get all this paperwork sent off ASAP, possibly Tuesday. I've handed in my notice today, basically, at my last employer. And if they ask my new employer, I say, yeah, it was, gotta be honest, bullying, racism, homophobia, all that. Something that, yeah, issues that I feel very strongly about. It affected my relationship with my ex-partner. Um, and there was a reason why I took a break from doing videos for a couple of months. There was a lot of things going on personally. I wasn't doing very well. I was very ill. I was also in bed with I was in crutches for a while. I couldn't walk. So I was in a very bad place, but I'm in a much better place now. I've met someone new. We're sort of talking, it looks a little good. So on a personal standpoint, things are improving. There's a lot of it. I've got a lot of hurdles to get through over the next month or two, but fingers crossed, up onwards and upwards, and positivity. And yeah, I will have some more videos for you soon. Of course, getting back into full time work. That I'll have to adjust the upload schedule and the live stream schedule because the hours I'll be doing. I'll be getting lots of early nights and early days, and but that's something we can get to when we get to it. But yeah, I'll be doing a lot of cycling. Or but the live streams and the upload schedule will be changed, but where I can. But I'll keep you guys updated over the weekend and into next week. But thank you very much for everything. I'll have some more updates. Right, food.